The guys turn to Hyun and say that he has worked hard. They think that it is only a matter of time before he becomes a prosecutor and congratulate him on his graduation. The parents looked at the boy and asked when their son managed to grow so much, and then offered to come closer, even though he said that he couldn't help but pass. The mother asks how it is possible to miss her son's graduation, and then claims that this is why they came to congratulate him. The woman asks if he will spend some time with his mom and dad, and offers to eat something tasty because they will buy him what he wants. Father says that he has finished his studies, and he will be able to start playing the violin again because he liked it. The boy screams and insists that they stop because he quit playing a long time ago, and asks why he is raising this topic again, because he thinks that he can't even make money with it, and then he threw the flowers. The guy claims that they didn't need to come at all, because he himself will figure out how to live. The protagonist thought about the tiny room next to the laundry run by his parents, the same food every day, and the stench of dry cleaning that had forever permeated his entire family. The young man realizes he's fed up with all this because he wants to live differently. He remembers how people called him a monster, but he still studied to the point of exhaustion. The boy realized that friendship had become a luxury for him, and his only friend was abroad because he didn't want to limit his life to the confines of this room. Hyun understood that for the sake of success that he could one day boast of, he would throw off the shackles of this boring life. But this isn't the end, and everyone talks about graduation as if it's the final test. However, the boy understands that he's only taken the first step into a new light-filled life. They say they graduated with some real tough son of a bitch this year. His classmates can't understand how he got ahead when there are so many more talented people around him. The man says he was an excellent student in high school, and there are rumors that he blackmailed some teachers. The interviewee believes he's broke and doesn't think this is true. The gentleman says that he doesn't know because this guy is simply something. He even swung at the interview for a scholarship from JN Holding, which is considered the pinnacle of the South Korean business world. Jihan Holding is a place where life blossoms once you join the company. Although a Jihan Holding scholarship recipient is practically a joke, since to put it bluntly, he becomes their company's loyal dog. The man says that he didn't care as long as he worked for them and could achieve success, because he believes that then he would be able to live differently, and that would be a guarantee of stability. The protagonist reflects on the fact that he graduated from law school with honors and became a prosecutor for the Western District. Decades later, wiping up the lawlessness of Jahan Holding, he continued his journey to the position of chief prosecutor. Instead of defending the law and justice, he defended their company. However, he began to wonder where success ended when his life would finally change. The guy reflects on the fact that it's not like he hadn't thought about it before, but the feeling of inferiority and greed inside him immediately subsided. The gentleman asks about sending him into politics. Hearing this, the worker says that with all due respect, he doesn't understand what politics he's talking about. The boss says that the company will settle all financial issues, and his past can play into their hands. The guy asks if they know since he's from a poor family, and thinks it's like going from the slums to the stars. The gentleman wonders if people wouldn't like that kind of story, since in his case it's not even a slum but the bottom of a well. The boss believes that Jahan also needs to have some connections with political circles, and therefore he wants to make his daughter a modern princess of Pyongan. Pyongan explains that this is the heroine of a Korean fairy tale who ran away from the royal palace to marry a poor man, Andal, who later became the military leader of the state. The gentleman suggests using his shitty past as their advertising. The guy agreed, and at that time thought that even despite this contempt, he still hated the smell of dry cleaning from his memories. The doctor tells the guy that he has pancreatic cancer and asks why he let himself go like this. The doctor says that the symptoms are not noticeable in the early stages, but if he visited, he then reports that they will continue chemotherapy, and he should inform his relatives about this. Standing at the station, the guy became curious if he could tell anyone that he was dying of cancer. He has a wealthy wife he didn't marry for love, and a father-in-law who considers him a pet taken in by Jihan Holding Management will immediately kick him out as soon as he stops being profitable. Hyun heard the call. His mother asked how he was, then said she wasn't looking for money and asked him not to hang up. The woman asks if he ate well, and the son explains that he's fine because he ate. When the mother hears his voice, she asks, surprised what happened to him and if he's very tired. The guy objects, and he suddenly saw girls carrying a musical instrument, and he became interested in what he had been doing all his life. Hyun reflects on the fact that in that hopeless past, it seems there were still moments of happiness and things that are more important than success and money. Mom asks if he is okay, but he assures her that everything is fine because he is just tired and thinks that everything will pass soon. Suddenly, the guy saw a man fall to the floor, and he screamed, asking if he was okay, and then suggested that he wake up and open his eyes. The guy realized that the man was passed out, but he still asked him to wake up and helped him get up. The main character reflects on the fact that he should have told his mother that he had cancer because it was better than dying in an accident. He believes he should have told his father-in-law that politics doesn't interest him because then he could have been with the man he loves. He thinks he shouldn't have spent his life cleaning up other people's dirty work. He should have lived confidently and with integrity. On graduation day, he was supposed to at least take a photo with his parents. The young man became curious about why people constantly regret the lives they've lived, and he wished he could go back to that time. The protagonist understands that he would not waste his life like this again, because he believes that people really hear music and that he heard joy at the moment of his death. The young man smelled the oil and realized that this smell from his childhood had permeated his entire body, and he inhaled it every day. The laundry room is just over 10 square meters, and so many years have passed, but he still can't forget it because that smell stayed with him until his death. The boy realizes that no matter how much he hated it as a child, he misses that smell now. And she thought that if he could just once meet his parents, who doted on him his whole life before he died, it would be so wonderful. Suddenly, the protagonist heard his mother screaming at him to get up quickly. She reminded him that it was time to go to school, but no matter how hard she tried to wake him, he just couldn't seem to wake up. The guy says that he went, and his mother asks in surprise, why so early, since she knows that he sat over the textbook again until the morning, and asks if he is tired. Hyun assures that everything is fine, because he will be back soon, and then the guy leaves. The father asks his beloved what she put in their son's food, and suggests that she confess. The woman looked at him in surprise and asked what he was even talking about. The man explained that he was simply being mature. Day after day passed, and the main character realized that he had returned to the past, and after his own death full of regrets, he found himself in the time he missed most. The young man remembered that in his last moment, he saw a white deer that brought him here, but he cannot know for sure, because in any case, he was given a second life. The guy knows for sure that he will never miss this precious chance. The guys ask Hyun surprised how he did it, knowing he got zeros on all his previous tests. He explains that he just tried really hard. The brown-haired boy claims that he simply copied everything, and the protagonist asks if he thinks he's lying and offers to bet money. At this time, the young man thought that these tests were as easy as pie compared to the law school exam. The teacher screams and turns to Hyun and tells him that he is urgently called to the teacher's room. When the guy arrived, he saw a woman screaming and asking if he was Hyun. The director suggested the woman calm down. The woman screams and says that the last person in the class suddenly became the first in the whole school, and then screams and asks him to honestly tell whether he cheated. The lady is wondering if his parents have money to pay tutors, since she has heard that he lives in a laundromat, and she thinks that it is obvious from looking at him. The director claims the lady is overstepping her bounds. She asks if he's aware that her eldest child attended an international school last year. The lady recalls that since then, she has done a lot in the parents' committee and collected contributions for cleaning the environment, and even contributed to the fact that their children were able to go on an excursion abroad. The woman claims screaming that her hygiene was always #1 on the list of the best, and then asks if he means to say that she can't catch some boy. The guy offers to be honest, and upon hearing this, the woman looked at him in surprise and asked what he just said. Hyun says it's Article 152. It's a crime committed by providing false information to a government employee or official in order to subject another person to criminal or administrative punishment. The boy claims that she used her position as president of the parents' committee to organize a fundraiser, while the procedure and conditions for holding the parents' meeting remain unclear. The young man claims that this does not look like free help on her part, since she heard that the incident with bribery among teachers turned into a huge scandal. The Supreme Court then handed down a huge number of sentences and asked if she'd forgotten them yet. Then he said that if she wanted, he could recite a couple of them. Hyun says he'd better ask again and suggests she answer frankly whether she really thinks he cheated. The woman screams, asking how this little brat dares to talk back to adults. The principal insists that the Hyung is right, and it's wrong to accuse someone of cheating without any evidence. The teacher says that if she doesn't stop, then he as her class teacher will have to intervene, and then he suggests that the guy return to his office because he will sort everything out. As he was leaving, the boy turned to the woman and told her to be more careful in the future. She looked at him angrily and said he was an impudent fellow. Walking down the corridor, the main character thought that she was a walking problem, and at least for a while, everything would be okay. Suddenly, the guy saw an advert for a music club and remembered that if he thought about it, this was the club the guy had spoken about. The boy asks his Hyung why he doesn't sign up for them, considering it's classical music after all. Then he reminds him that he used to really enjoy playing the violin. The boy remembered something like this had happened. He'd once played for his parents, and suddenly he'd heard music. He realized it was the song he'd heard just before he died. Hyun opened the door to the classroom and realized that he had entered a club class and then asked for forgiveness and explained that he heard music and did not understand how he got there. The teacher insists that there is nothing to worry about and that since he is drawn to music, it means he has a good ear, and then asks him to introduce himself. The guy says his name is Hyun, and the young man from the last desk asks if he really came to their club. The protagonist says he now understands where their classes are held. The boy turns to the teacher and reminds him that this is the guy he was telling you about. The woman says he's the first-year student who did best on his exams, and the guy says that's exactly it. The teacher says she's pleased to meet him, and then tells him she's Kang Hye-jong, a second-year music teacher, and then asks if he wants to join their club. The boy objects in surprise and then apologizes, and the teacher suggests he just look around. She suggests they come in quickly. The boy says that the teacher told them to perform something, and then asks Hyun if he played something like that too. When Khan heard this, she asked if it was true. He said that something like that had happened once, but only briefly in childhood. The teacher says that now she understands where he got such a talent for listening, because she believes that it is important to be able to play, but it is also necessary to be able to listen. The lady suggests they listen and share their impressions. The boy insists that their teacher plays so well. The protagonist thought that the melody began cautiously, as if walking on frozen ground, and continued at an allegro tempo. The bow, which had been moving leisurely, now seemed to be piercing a crumbling layer of ice, and it seemed as if her fingers were dancing, as if desperately trying to fight the cold wind. Suddenly, the boy realized the melody had changed. The icy rush of the strings, shattering the firmament, continued unabated. The boy thought that this was surprising, because in his past life, he had often encountered orchestral and concert classics because he had received his education among the upper classes, and therefore knows her skills exactly, and believes that the lady is not at all a simple music teacher. Hyun informs him that it's Vivaldi's Seasons of the Year, the third movement, Winter. The woman, surprised, asks if he knows the title, and asks if he likes classical music so much, and how he likes the performance. The protagonist claims that it was great, and he is very surprised, and then asks if she accidentally injured her right hand. The teacher looked at him in surprise, and he says that it happens unconsciously, but she seems to tense her index finger when she takes the bow, and this is especially noticeable during a change of melody. Hen asks in surprise where he got that from, and the boy thought that he didn't know how to explain it to him because he himself didn't fully understand it. The main character understands that he never had any special talents because he simply often listened to music, but he became curious about what it was because now it was as if the melody itself was coming to life before his eyes. Hyung says that it just seemed that way for some reason, and then smiles. After the lesson, the teacher thought about how she was suddenly overwhelmed by memories because her dream of becoming a violinist had burst like a soap bubble in an instant, and she became interested in how he found out. The lady reflects on the fact that her Hyung has excellent intuition and is well-versed in music, but she doesn't understand how it was possible to notice her habit, which remained after her rehabilitation course during her performance. She recalls the words that this is especially noticeable during a change in melody, and knows that the melody changes only once, but not only to catch this change, but also to discern in it the state of her hand is an impossible task for ordinary people. Hen looked at the portrait of Paganini and thought that only he could have done this, because he considers himself an unrivaled genius. In the evening, the boy was watching TV and heard that Jihan Holding was taking its first steps in the previously undeveloped semiconductor business, and they had developed the world's first megabyte DRAM, and the Republic of Korea is becoming the leader of the global semiconductor industry. Hearing this, the young man realized how successful the corporation was back then. The Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea and the company's president visited a semiconductor manufacturing plant together. Sun Il-sung, president of Jaehyun Holding, under the motto, "Grow or Perish," he eliminated all nepotism within the company. The businessman was relentlessly striving for success, and the boy thought that if he recalled the affairs he had brought into Jaehyun Holding, it was strange that they all arose with such a leader. After hearing the news, his father said that Jaehyun Holding was simply amazing. Meanwhile, the boy thought that their paths would never cross again. A mother asks her son what he plans to do during the holidays. He explains that he'll be helping with the laundry since it's the height of the seasons. Dad says Mom is glad he's proud of them, but she thinks he's changed. So suddenly, Mom asks why he doesn't go see Grandpa because she'll let them know if they need his help. The woman reports that the grandfather said that he really wants to see his grandson. Hearing this, the main character thought that if he remembered there were still about 5 years left until the day of his grandfather's death, he would already be over 70, so he would pass away from old age exactly when his exams began. The young man recalls that at the time, he was so immersed in his studies that he barely even attended the funeral. He stayed there for a while and then returned to his studies. The boy knows he's barely seen him in life, as if he has no family or tribe. His father suggests they relax there, explore the city, and even have something delicious to eat. The protagonist reflected on the past, of a life full of regrets, and resolved not to repeat those mistakes. He asks his mother what food his grandfather likes. The boy does not understand what happened, since he suddenly wanted to see him, and remembers that this did not happen in his past life. Grandfather then broke off relations with his mother, and sitting on the train, he became curious about what else would happen in his new life. Hyun looked at his grandfather's house and thought that, as expected, it wasn't a house, but rather a castle. He knew his mother's parents were rich, but he hadn't imagined them to be that rich. Dongju Chemical is one of the leading companies in the South Korean chemical industry. His grandfather, Yoo Dong-yul, founded it. He always held patriarchal views and believed that women were incapable of running a business. So no matter how outstanding his mother was, she would never have been allowed to run the company. When his mother married his father, a man from a humble family, she was kicked out of the house and cut off from all ties. Eventually, the company passed to his uncle, who had absolutely no talent for management. Dongju Chemical, which his grandfather had worked so hard on, was ruined in less than 10 years due to the influx of foreign capital. The boy knows that in his past life, his grandfather never even bothered to look for him, and he only saw his cousins a couple of times in his early childhood. By the time he realized all this, it was already too late. The guy rang the intercom and said it was Hyun. The woman opened the door and asked if he was tired from the journey. The boy gave her the box and offered to take it, as his mother had said his grandfather would like it. The lady enthusiastically said she was sure he would be thrilled and suggested they go into the living room while she took it. The woman asks if he knows the whole family is getting together today. The boy is surprised to hear this. The lady turns to the gentleman and announces that the Hyung has arrived. The man, surprised, says he's never heard of it before, and then turns to the young man and asks what he's doing here. The woman in the green dress thinks that Hung probably told him to come to impress his father, and then asks how long ago it was when she left, saying that she didn't need the money or their family. The lady asks if it wasn't a bit obvious to send this son here. Hyun objects and claims that it's not like that, since it wasn't his mother who sent him here, but his grandfather. Hearing this, the man cried out and asked how it was possible to lie so brazenly, because he did not understand how the father could call his son Sonji here. At this time, the grandfather comes into the room and claims that this is true, because he invited Hyun here, and then he asks what they are not happy with. The woman says that everything is fine and tells the father not to worry, and the grandfather turns to the boy and asks how his mother is doing. The guy insists everything is fine, and mom is doing well. Hearing this, the uncle doesn't understand why dad suddenly decided to ask, then approaches him and reminds him that they need to discuss company matters. The uncle invites the Hyung to go play with his cousins. Hearing this, the boy thinks his uneven breathing betrays his fear that he might take his place. And this man is so rotten inside that his stench can be smelled from 3 miles away. Hyun turns to his grandfather and says that his uncle is right, because they haven't seen each other for a long time, and asks if he can go. The head of the family says that he can join in, and the guy thanks him and offers to continue their conversation, and then leaves. The main character looked at the man and thought that, for now, it would be better to avoid him and pretend that he didn't know anything, because he thought that it wasn't worth smearing himself with this dirt. The guy thinks that now he should be somewhere else, and then opens the door and enters the guy's room and greets them. Hyun says they haven't seen each other in a while. The girls were surprised when they saw him. His cousin asks what he forgot at his grandfather's house. The guy remembered that in his past life, Yoo Jin-ok had tarnished the name of Dongju Chemical with fraud and illegal financial transactions. When he brought shame on the company with his greed, Jin-suk acted differently than he did now, tearfully begging him for help, and in the end, he turned into a pathetic, frightened miser. The main character realizes that even though he has matured, he hasn't changed one bit. Yoo Jin-seok turns to the boy and says that he asks what the hell he is doing here, and also asks if his mother has run out of money. At this time, the guy thought that if he didn't stand up for himself now, they would continue to look down on him. Hyun turns to Jin-seok, then places his hand on his shoulder and tells him not to get cocky. Hearing this, the guy clenches his fist and asks what he said, then offers to repeat it and grabs him by the shirt. Jin-suk screams and calls him poverty and claims that he will quickly put him in his place. At this time, the main character thought that there is a sure way to deal with such arrogant degenerates who have nothing to their name except their parents' money. Hyun kicks him in the stomach with all his might, knocking him to the floor. Jin-seok asks, how dare he do that? But the protagonist grabs him by the shirt, and he screams, begging for help. Hyun knew that when you work as a prosecutor, you go through not only fire and water, but also the school of life. And no matter how much he grew younger, dealing with such a child was a piece of cake. The maid tells the master that his youngest daughter cooked it and offers to try it. The grandfather tries it and says it's wonderful food. At this time, the guy looked at his uncle and aunt and thought that he never even imagined that his mother's cooking would create such a situation. He sees that they're visibly nervous, and his sister, who disappeared from their lives, suddenly re-enters the game. However, he knows that Grandpa wouldn't have made Mom his successor anyway because he doesn't have the kind of characters. Hyun muses that it's still hilarious that grown-ups are so worried about a little crab. The man turns to his father and asks how he would like to retire, explaining that he has always worked for the good of the company and therefore believes it is time to rest and spend time with his grandchildren. Donghwa detergent. However, the daughter and son remained silent in response, and the grandfather, surprised, asks what kind of managers they are if they don't know what their own company does. He then asks if they want him to give them the job. The uncle explains that's not what he meant. The head of the company says that's enough. He doesn't want to hear it, and suggests with a squeal that he think about what it's like to be a simple hired hand his whole life. The son turns to his father and asks him to at least listen to them, and the man asks what the idiots, can even be trusted with. Grandfather says that Donju Chemical will remain in the hands of those who have the talent for it, because he dedicated his entire life to the company, and if his brainchild remains in the hands of someone like him, then he will never find peace even after death. Hearing this, the guy thought that his grandfather was so determined, and it turns out that even this tirade did not bring them to their senses because they still managed to ruin the company. The protagonist realizes that people really don't change at all. Grandfather reads the newspaper and asks if it is true that their country is going to join an international economic organization, and he thinks that the world is changing so quickly, and then asks Hyun what he wants to do when he grows up. The boy replies that he just wants to make his mom and dad happy. The man insists he's a model son and asks if he wants to earn a lot of money. Hearing this, the main character thought that if he uses the knowledge left over from his past life, he could easily get rich. But he believes that now he is not very concerned about finances. Hyun states that he wants to live a life that he himself would consider happy, since wealth does not always guarantee happiness. Grandfather says that he hasn't seen him for a long time, and thinks that he has matured a lot. The maid tells the guy that she took his things to his room, and therefore suggests that he go and look around. The grandfather approaches his grandson, and suggests they have dinner together tonight. After all, his grandfather's friend really wants to see him. When the boy entered the room, he realized that his mother used to live there, and thought that she had a wonderful room, but now she was raising a child, washing other people's clothes, and still never complained about the difficulties. Suddenly, the boy saw the violin and realized she was still taking care of it. He knew his mother played the violin, and that's why she was so happy when he started playing too. When the young man wanted to pick up the violin, a maid suddenly entered the room and said that his grandfather had prepared clothes for him and asked if he would like to try them on. The gentleman turns to the driver Kim and asks if he's aware that their Hyun passed his exams with the highest score. He says that now they'll move in with that old man, and he'll start blabbering about his offspring again. The man says that's how they communicate, because at some point all their conversations turned into a competition over who has the better grandchildren, and then he says that today they'll put an end to it. At this time, the young gentleman thought that he didn't even know where they were going, but he realized that the streets looked so familiar. Suddenly, the boy remembered that he had been in this place, and by that time, the house had already become ownerless, but he understood that at this time, it still had an owner. The man turns to Chairman Yu and says that this old man is walking around there even without his permission, and even with his grandson, and is not standing on ceremony at all, and then he smiles. The protagonist thought that his grandfather's friend all this time was Chairman Song of Jaehan Holding. The boy greeted the gentleman and said his name was Hyun. The man asked what kind of gentleman he was and suggested calling him Grandpa. Son Chae-won is better known as Chairman's son, and the story of Jaehan Holding began with him. During the Korean War, he migrated to the south. A man of remarkable insight, he opened a small trading company in the ruins of a Seoul in the very center of the country, which later grew into South Korea's finest corporation. The guy remembered that when he became a Jaehan Holding scholarship recipient, he had already passed away, and he didn't even think that they would meet like this. Son asks the chairman of the company how long he plans to cling to the chemical industry, since he thinks it's a shame to waste his managerial skills on just this. And the grandfather asks why he's back at it again. The man says he could open a shopping center or get into aviation. He believes that if their country sets its sights on foreign markets, but the conversation is interrupted by a girl who greets her grandfather. The dream says that she is his granddaughter and invites the girl to greet the guests. When the boy saw this girl, he thought she was the Ice Queen, and the grandfather invites the boys to go spend time together. The girl shows the guy that they have a living room there and then says that she wants to show him her room. At this point, the boy reflected on how they'd barely seen each other when he'd worked for Jahan, but he knew of her reputation. After all, she was the chairman's granddaughter, and he'd inherited his character and talents. Cold and meticulous head of the product department, Jahan Ice Queen, son Yuha, the girl tells him she lives in this room. Meanwhile, the young man is thinking that for the 1990s, her room is simply luxurious as expected, from the granddaughter of a major entrepreneur. Yuka asks if he is the first in school in his village, and says that it is not surprising, because in the villages, the kids don't know how to do that, and she is interested in whether he will be able to solve it. Hyun thought that this was a task for first-year high school students, and of course, an 11-year-old child would not be able to handle it. The guy offers to give him a pencil, and a few minutes later, the girl screaming in surprise says that this can't be, because everything is absolutely correct, and it only takes 10 minutes while she spends an hour solving this. The protagonist thought that after the law school exam, such problems would be a piece of cake for him, and he knows that even the great and powerful Song Yuha is still just a child and doesn't look like the Ice Queen at all. The boy asks Yuka if she can play the violin. She claims she's good at it, and he offers to show her. The girl told him to listen carefully, and then she began to play. The boy remembered that his teacher had also played this song for them during club activities, and it was Vivaldi's The Seasons' third movement. Hyun doesn't understand whether this could be a coincidence, but the most important thing is that she's good at it. Like a little snow fairy, she trots along unburdened, filling everything around her with freshness. The boy understands that it's difficult to perform something like this at 11 years old. Although her fingers are still too short and the melody is lagging, her excellent sense of rhythm compensates for all the shortcomings, and not a single mistake, it doesn't suit her. The girl asks him how he liked her performance. He says he liked it because he thinks she plays well. Yoo-hoo says she begged the teacher to practice with her. He says the song is good, but asks Togo if he should choose another one. Hearing this, the little girl screams and asks why, since she thinks that she has never made a mistake, and even the teacher said that she is good. Hyun says he's right, because she's doing well. But at the same time, he can't understand how to explain that. If you practice overly complex pieces for too long, your body can learn and adapt incorrectly. Suddenly, the boy became interested in how he knew all this, and if he recalled the last time he asked the teacher about something he could not know about, whether it was an accident that she had injured her right hand. The guy doesn't understand why he even said that. The girl asks if he can play the violin, then offers to show him quickly and hands him the violin. The young man objects and explains that he didn't say that he could, but when he picked up the instrument, he didn't understand why he had this feeling, because his heart was beating so hard. The boy understands that he only has vague memories of how he learned to play, but the instrument seems to be telling him to play because he will succeed. The maid informs the young mistress that her teacher has arrived. The little girl greets the teacher, takes her hand, and then suggests that they hurry. The lady asks in surprise what happened, and the girl says that she has a request. When they were returning home, the grandfather asked his grandson if he liked his friend. Hyun said he had a wise look. Hearing this, the grandfather then asked what his look was like. Hyun looked at his grandfather and thought that, in the end, he was unable to get rid of his useless children, which is why Dongju Chemical finally went bankrupt. The boy says that his grandfather has a very warm look and a very warm heart. Grandpa says they think they heard the sound of a violin coming from their room. The guy says that's right, because Yuka is learning to play, and she let him listen. Suddenly, the boy doesn't understand what just happened. He'd only been playing the violin for so long, and it was so long ago. At that age, even maintaining a proper posture is difficult, let alone knowing the notes. The young man understands that when he holds the violin, his body moves by itself, and at the moment when the bow barely touches the strings, he seems to become a bird flying right over the icy surface. A cautious flap of wings instantly turns into a run, and when a frost storm howls and the entire earth is covered with a blanket of ice, the melody changes as smoothly as someone singing. The main character looked at his trembling hand and doesn't know what happened then, but he still can't calm his heartbeat and trembling. He thought that if he suddenly picked up the violin again, he didn't know if he would be able to do it again. The man turns to his grandson and asks if he knows what his grandfather does. He explains that his grandfather owns a chemical manufacturing company, and Jinsok told him about it. Grandfather asks if he knows what the chemical industry is. Hearing this, the little boy thinks the question is a bit complicated. Hyun knows that Dongju Chemical started its journey as a soap factory and now produces various chemicals from washing powders to fertilizers and pesticides. But compared to how far the chemical industry can go, this is just the beginning. After all, new chemical technologies will become the foundation for IT and lead society to a remarkable future. The guy says that the chemical industry, and he thinks that this is what will help people build the industry of the future. Hearing this, the man was surprised, and the driver told the gentleman that they had already arrived. A grandfather tells his grandson to remember that they have dinner planned any day now. Hearing this, the boy thinks that if it had been a regular dinner, he wouldn't have mentioned it. The man says that the chairman of the Sun is organizing a meeting, and that not only the grandfather's acquaintances will be there, but also his advisors. Hearing this, the main character thought that it was not enough for him to organize a meeting because he was also inviting other people's grandchildren there, and did not understand how this could even be called a simple dinner. The guy wondered if this was a meeting with the current leaders of the chaebols. Back in the 1990s, when the ties between the company founders were still close, friendly meetings were held between the owners of the first generation of chaebols, where they could make useful contacts in order to further support the selfish interests of the ruling class to which they themselves belonged. But over time, all power passed into the hands of the second generation of chaebols, and the old meetings were of no use. The protagonist reflected that, of course, he only knew this because he was constantly trying to cover up Jahan Holdings' actions. After all, these encounters had nothing to do with ordinary people. It was only their world. Hyun reflected on the fact that the key to all this was that only the recognized heirs of the chaebols could participate in these meetings, and he wondered if his grandfather was trying to make him his replacement. The boy thought that if this was so, then his place in this world had already been determined, and therefore he would not let the things that his grandfather had built fall apart so easily. At this point, Yuka asks the teacher to play again. The lady asks how many times she's already played, but the girl asks again. Khan thought that this was Vivaldi's Season's third movement, and she would never have learned this piece at such an early age, even if she had studied the violin professionally. The teacher thought that she was well paid, and the girl was smart, but this was her stubbornness, even though she was so good that there was nothing to say. Han asks the little girl if she doesn't like the way she plays, and the girl says that it's not really that much, but Hyun's performance really makes the room feel like winter. Hearing this, the teacher thought that it was strange, because she had never told anyone about this, but she became interested in who this Hyung was. The next morning, the boy asks his grandfather how he slept. He says it was fine, and invites his grandson to sit down. Hyun greeted his cousin, and thought that since that day, he doesn't even dare to look him in the eye, and doesn't understand how Jinsuk could commit fraud if he doesn't have the guts. Aunt turns to Dad and says that she has prepared stewed ribs and offers him to try it, then takes a plate to put it on for him. The boy doesn't understand what kind of business this is because he's sure that she's never even cooked in her life. Grandpa says that he has enough ribs and asks if they still have the crab that Hyung's mother cooked. Auntie says, "Of course he stayed and she'll put it down now," then looks angrily at the boys. She asks Dad who will be going to the banquet with this time, and Grandpa asks what it has to do with her. The lady says that future heirs are invited there, but he still hasn't come with his grandchildren. Hearing this, the main character thought that this was the meeting that his grandfather had spoken about, and as expected, the relatives had plans for it. Auntie claims that the other kids are still too young, and wonder why he doesn't go there with Jinsok. Hearing this, the head of the family, surprised, asks if she even understands what place they're talking about. The lady replies that she's not a child and understands everything. Grandpa, screaming, asks why the hell she's suggesting he go with Jinsok. Auntie explains that she meant that maybe something good would come of it, and asks why waste the opportunity. He asks if he should just point his finger to the sky and take her son with him, then declares that they're useless, pathetic idiots. And the man looked at his grandson and remembered the words about how this would help people build the industry of the future, and then said that his Hyung would go to this banquet with him. For several hours, the boy sits in the car and thinks about how they even went to pick out a suit, and thinks that apparently everything is so serious, and he doesn't even know what to do about it. When the guy looked out the window, he realized that this was a student town, which brought back memories for him, because back then he also had no money, and he ate alone and crammed the criminal code. Suddenly the car stopped, and the driver asked the gentleman if he was okay. The boy said he was fine and asked what happened. The driver explains that the car in front braked sharply and says he'll go around it. At that moment, the guy looks out the window and sees a foreigner standing there. He thinks he and the taxi driver must be having trouble understanding each other. Hyun asks the driver to wait and then gets out of the car and asks the man if he can help him with anything. In a few minutes, the foreigner was sitting in his car and the boy asked if he needed to go to the Silly Hotel, but the driver misheard and arrived at Silama. The man says that everything is correct and he also lost his wallet, but thanks to him, he was saved and then thanks the boy. The guy asks if he came to Korea as a tourist. The gentleman explains that he has a business meeting in the city. Hearing this, the boy thought that he should have been provided with a car and thought that maybe he had come to a small company. The man explained that he wanted to see the local sites, and that's why he arrived a week before the appointed day and got lost. The boy asks if he likes to travel. The gentleman asks if it's wonderful to experience new cultures and make friends all over the world, believing that casual encounters sometimes turn into special connections. The man says their meeting is definitely one of those and thinks it's wonderful that he met him. The driver tells the young gentleman that they've already arrived. The foreigner says he had a blast and thanks the guy again. Hyun insists he didn't do anything and believes the driver deserves the credit. The man says he would give him a business card, but he doesn't have a wallet, and then says his name is Samuel A. If he suddenly needs help, he can come to this hotel and ask him. They shook hands, and the Hyung wished the man a safe journey. The driver tells the gentleman that his grandson Hyung knows English, and not just at a school level, because he speaks it completely fluently. The chairman said he understood, and the driver could go free. Grandfather reflected on the fact that the company he'd worked for all his life in his youth had been his greatest pride, and he'd thought his eldest son should inherit it. The man reflects that this was something completely natural, but then Hyunja was born, and she was always a reasonable and sincere girl, so he also began to slowly change his views. The grandfather believes that other people's prejudices made him even more doubtful about whether he could regret it. At that moment, he remembered the boy's words about simply wanting to make his mom and dad happy and living a life he himself would consider happy. The gentleman thought that every time he looks at his grandson, he sees how smart he is and how similar he is to his mother, and he realized that he misses his daughter. Grandfather asks Hyun if he remembers tonight's dinner. He assures him he does, and then suddenly thinks about how that dinner is already today. The young man understands that the banquet to which the founders and heirs of the chaebol are invited is not just a luxurious social event, but also an opportunity to show the world his hand-picked successors. A wild place where only predators gather, and the main character thinks it's incredible because he finds himself in the very center of events. The gentleman says he needs to stop by work before the meeting and suggests the boy get ready. Hearing this, he almost choked, and the grandfather asks why he is so surprised, and then reminds him that he himself just said the other day that chemistry will become the engine of progress, and the chemical industry will become the basis for the industry of the future. The man claims he didn't know the child was interested in chemistry, and was even surprised. He then says that if he had known, he would have given him a tour of the company long ago. Hyun realized that he remembered it, and thought that he probably liked his answer that much. When they arrived at the factory, the grandfather asked him if he liked them. The boy said they were huge. The man thought it was a good thing he'd brought him along. The guy thought that these weren't just empty words, because the Dongju chemical plant was in no way inferior to the subsidiaries of the largest chaebols. And a few minutes later, he saw that very construction site. His grandfather has begun construction of another factory to produce materials for electronics. The boy realizes this is an excellent choice, given the future development of the world. But after the death of his grandfather, his uncle sold everything down to the last brick. The workers greet the chairman Yoo Hyun saw his uncle, and thought that he would seriously try to intervene, and thought that it would be simply incredible. The grandfather asks the director what he thinks will happen to the chemical industry in the future. The man replies that he thinks they should focus on industries producing high value-added goods. The director says he thinks it would be a great idea to build a plant to produce display materials. The gentleman asks what needs to be done to turn the chemical pipeline industry into a high value-added industry. He says we need to recruit talented personnel. This guy was surprised to hear this, as it was the CEO's response. He understands that unlike other industries, which constantly produce goods and build assembly lines for existing industries, the chemical industry is laying the foundation for new industries of the future, and in a word, the development of existing specialists is a priority. The boy realizes that his uncle's words demonstrate how ignorant he is of what he's doing. His grandfather says he never ceases to disappoint him, and then tells his grandson to come with him. Hyun thought that the director deserved it, but he became curious about the person who stood behind his uncle, and it was strange because he looked familiar. The grandfather asks the boy what he thinks it means to be a leader. Hearing this, he thinks his grandfather is probably worried about his uncle's unreliability. Hyun wonders if the point of business isn't to make sure everyone is well fed and provided for, and they say that excess is worse than lack, and he thinks that's true. The gentleman stroked the boy's head and said that their Hyung would grow up to be a good man, and then asked how he managed to say such wonderful things every time. At this time, the guy thought that now he is not at all greedy for a career, because he believes that one life consumed by money and power is enough. But if the fact that his answers touch his grandfather could change his bleak future, there's only one thing he'd like to change. The boy says his grandfather has a truly magnificent office, and he saw a photo of his mother when she was a baby, and he realized that his grandfather still misses her. The gentleman asks the boy if he's ever seen a gramophone. He says he's never seen one before and offers to listen to at least one song. Grandpa says that they can listen to it as much as he wants, and then says that he used to listen to this record a lot. Hearing the music, the boy thought it was Beethoven's Spring Sonata for violin and piano. The fresh, almost sweet melody tickled the ear, and the violin and piano created a wonderful harmony. The boy realizes that it is as if he is watching flower petals dancing in a light spring breeze. But this is not a professional performance, and every time the violin barely noticeably goes out of tune, the sound of the piano fills this void. Hyun knows that this happens because there is a noticeable difference in skill, and it is difficult for the general public to hear this in a rather skillful performance. Neither the artist nor the title of the piece are recorded, but the cover is heavily worn, due to the fact that it was listened to often, and probably the person who's playing is recorded on the record. And then he asks the girl if his mother plays this melody. The grandfather asks in surprise how he found out about this, and the boy explains that he saw her photo on his desk. The man thought he realized it because Hyunja was holding a violin there. The plate remained there during the recording, and even the teacher was full of praise, and his daughter herself was very pleased. I listened to the record only once, and my grandfather said that he could notice the difference between an amateur and a professional. The gentleman suggests listening to another record. And the boy realized that this was different music, because from the very first note, the sweet melody envelops him in the aroma of spring flowers. It was a flawless performance without a single mistake, and the performer had a perfect feel for the score. Even when harmonizing with the piano, the violin sounds awkward. The melody is sad, as if the instruments are whispering words of love to each other. The guy claims that the violinist is simply something, and at that time, he thought that the performance was so pure that there was nothing to say. Hyun asks if he's played the record to death, and then says that the recording quality is slowly declining, and the sound must have changed due to the humidity. However, they say it's going to be incredibly hot this year. The gentleman thought about how he often listens to classical music, but would never have noticed. The man became curious whether the human ear was even capable of detecting such a thing. The assistant turns to the chairman and asks for forgiveness, and then he looks at the boy and asks in surprise what he is doing here. The gentleman explains that Hyun is going somewhere with him. Hearing this, the uncle cries out and asks if he's seriously taking him to the banquet. Grandfather says that of course he will take it, and then asks if it seems like he was joking. The son turns to his father and claims that this is not a place where they take just anyone, and thinks that even his older brother is out of luck, even though he is the oldest man in the family after him. Uncle screaming asks how he can take Hyun with him. He wonders if his daughter Hyunja has even met him once since she was rude and ran away from home, knowing she never called him in 10 years. And the man screaming claims that now she has her eye on their company and is trying to push his children away. And the grandfather screams and says that he is a moron and can't even answer a simple question, and asks what he is allowing himself to do now. The chairman claims that he is nothing special, but still boasts about his company. Grandfather asks if he understands who he's yelling at and informs him that there's a child right there. He thought his son was just like his aunt. He'd like to find somewhere to sit and stretch his legs. At this time, the boy does not understand what to do at all when they are talking such shameless nonsense. The chairman turns to the man and asks why he was there. He explains that he's responsible for a chemical materials development project and wanted to convey something to them personally. The gentleman invites him out, and the man agrees. He then turns to the boy and says he'll be right back, and offers to wait for him a bit. At this point, the protagonist added that he'd definitely seen him somewhere before, but he didn't know exactly where. When they were returning home, Grandpa said he saw something he probably shouldn't have. The boy insisted it was still interesting, and the grandfather looked at him in surprise and asked if he really thought so, and then smiled and said that he was also a good boy. The gentleman believes that if the other boys were even a little bit like him, then his grandfather would be able to live a little more peacefully. At that moment, the boy thought about how much had changed compared to his previous life. After all, his grandfather was saying such things to him, and he wasn't even his eldest grandson. Hyun understood that the record was terribly worn out and thinks that he probably regrets the past. The gentleman asks Bomjin if he remembers by what right he is here at all. The son assures that he, of course, remembers perfectly well, and the father says that he behaved decently. When they got out of the car, the main character looked at his uncle and realized that he was nervous. But if you think about it, he was also a little tense. The boy thought that he would still be able to attend the meeting that he had previously only known about from rumors. And in a life wasted on his own vanity, he wouldn't even be able to set foot in a banquet hall. He understands that the world is truly a mysterious place. The gentleman invites them to come in quickly and greets the chairman. The guy saw the man and thought that he was Song Il-sun, the director of Jahan Holding, and thought that up close, he looked even younger because he barely recognized him. Hyun felt that the aura was somehow different. And besides, he had never seen him bow to anyone in his past life and could not even imagine such a thing. Kira, the man, greets Chairman Song Yi and says that he must introduce them, and then turns to the chairman and asks him to approach him, as this is the man. And the grandfather looked at the boy and said that they were talking to him, and then asked what brought him here. The man says that he must introduce them, and then says that this is Mr. Gardner. And then the conversation continues in English. The man claims that he remembered his name, and then says that he regretted not having learned his contact information. Hyun says that he just did what he had to, and is glad that they met again so unexpectedly. A friend of the grandfather says that he has taken good care of his grandson's education because he believes that his pronunciation is even better than his, and they studied abroad. At this time, the chairman thought that the driver had already told him about this, but he could not even imagine that he was so good. The gentleman turns to Mr. Sun and asks for forgiveness, then explains that he was too happy to meet his benefactor. Sun objects and thinks that it must have been a very touching meeting, and then says that Hyuk is an adult and needs to talk a little and suggests hanging out with his peers. The guy looked at the man and thought that he had already seen this look in a past life. And this is a look that catches the attention of the gifted in the crowd. Hyun thought about how he had said that he would never work for him in this life. Samuel was doing, since he had received an invitation to a banquet of representatives of South Korean chaebols, since it looked as if he and Song Il-sung were on good terms. And the servant says that they have arrived, and then opens the door and asks the young master to settle in there while he waits for dinner time. When the guy walked inside, he saw that it was a banquet hall within a banquet hall. He thinks they looked at the adults and had already managed to gather in similar groups. Hyun reflects on how he's not going to make friends there anyway. Suddenly, a girl turns to the boy and says that she missed him. The young man greets her and says that she looks just like an actress at an awards ceremony. Chairman Song has more than 10 grandchildren, but he still brought his granddaughter to the banquet. And as expected, he's very different from his grandfather. Not paternal inheritance, but natural selection. The boy understands that this is precisely why Jahan Holding managed to become the best. The young man believes that his grandfather has also changed his mind a bit recently. Meanwhile, he avoids eye contact with the young lady. The boy doesn't understand why she's glaring at him and thinks that's how everyone looks at them. He asks the girl if she wants to tell him anything. Yuka asks him to teach her to play the violin. He asks her why, surprised, knowing she already has a good teacher. She explains that while she likes her current teacher, he was the only one who could summon winter. At this time, the lady watching people does not understand what kind of place this is, because she knows that all these people are shown on TV. The teacher recalled a conversation with the gentleman in which he suggested she perform with Yuka. He believed that without her, his granddaughter wouldn't have been able to play like she did. The gentleman says that his granddaughter will be performing at the meeting and asks if she can accompany him on the piano, since he heard that she plays the keys well, and asks not to upset the old man. The teacher thought that the meeting was at most a family get-together, but now she understood what it was. At this time, the young gentleman does not understand where the girl went, because she said that they would see each other later. Grandpa called as Hyung, and when the boy approached, he realized they would be sitting next to Chairman Song's group, and of course, he was Grandpa's friend. The gentleman asks the boy if he's made any friends, and he happily replies that he has. And at that moment, he thinks it's not such a lie after all, because he's become close with Yuka. Grandpa says that one day he might need people from here, and therefore he should be friendly with everyone. The old man believes that he should try to learn to distinguish who needs him and who needs him. Hearing this, Baeomjin thought that since he had decided to tell him this, Dongju Chemical would probably actually transfer. The man turns to the gentleman and asks them to take their seats, and then announces that there will be a short performance before the dishes are served. Wilson announces that his granddaughter is about to play the violin, and therefore suggests greeting Yuka's sleep with thunderous applause. Hearing this, the main character understood why she left so suddenly, and thinks that by adding a dress, it could be called Concord. The young man looked at the pianist and thought that something was not very well with her, and became interested in whether everything was really okay with her. In a few minutes, all the guests heard the melody of Vivaldi, Season's Winter. They were amazed branches. It was amazing. The boy thought that this was simply amazing, because her skill was much better than last time, from the pose to the technique itself. He doesn't understand how she has grown so much in her acting in such a short time, and he wonders how long she has been rehearsing. Grandpa says Yuka's playing is simply amazing, and thinks Chairman's son should be proud of his granddaughter. He can't even believe it's just a hobby. The gentleman turns to the girl and says that this is a wonderful performance, and the boy claims that she hid wonderfully. Yuka gives the boy a violin and says that now it's his turn, and the grandfather looks at her in surprise and asks what she's talking about. The young lady explains that Hyun plays very well, and then asks him to show them, because she knows that he also likes it. Hearing this, the guy thought about how she said that he liked playing the violin, but he never really thought about it. Grandfather asks in surprise if he can play the violin, but little one objects and says that he only learned it for a few months. Yuka claims that he literally plays better than her teacher, and after hearing this, the guy doesn't understand why she's saying all this, because he's not sure that he can play the way he played for Yuka. Hyun thinks that it's better to pretend that he doesn't know how than to embarrass himself in front of everyone. The grandfather turns to his grandson and tells him to do as he sees fit. At this time, the main character thought that this was the place where the leaders of the business world gathered, and his grandfather transferred him to introduce him to them. The guy thinks that he is not a professional, so he should not expect too much from himself, and thinks that everything will definitely be fine, and he will play only once. The boy took the violin and told his grandfather that he would play, and the old man thought that he was proud of this guy. At this time, the teacher thought that thank God it was over, because she didn't understand why there were only company executives there. The lady understands that if she turns on the TV, she will definitely bump into one of them, and therefore thinks that she has screwed up even more than when she participated in the competitions. The teacher reflects on the fact that she would never want to repeat such an experience and would like to go home as soon as possible. A man asks Miss Park Soon-yeon if she could play another song. He was told to tell her she would be paid even more than the first time. Yuka again. Hyun approaches the teacher and greets her and asks if she just played the piano. The lady says that's true and asks who he is. The guy says his name is Hyun, and this time he'll be performing with the violin. The teacher thought that the heirs of the Chibols were bragging about their talents and believed that she would be paid for it in any case, and agreed. The guy tells the teacher to hold her breath before pressing the first key. The lady surprised asks if she should begin with holding her breath. He explains that when she played the second part, they made a small mistake where the melody changes. Hearing this, the woman asked in surprise how he knew this. The guys thought for a while that she thought no one would notice, but the child was able to hear her, which was a second's mistake. The main character tells her not to worry, just remember to hold her breath. The guy comes on stage and greets all the guests, and then says that his name is Kang Hyun, and he is not a professional, but asks for their attention. The boy thought about how his grandfather listened to his mother's sonata every day to ease his longing for her, and if this tiny violin could console his grandfather's heart. Even though he said he wasn't that good, his heart was beating madly and pulsating, as if begging him to play. At such moments, the main character feels that inevitably, or by chance, this will change his future life, and then he began to play. At this time, the teacher thought that this was not the Beethoven sonata, whose melody was engraved in her head, and considered that she had a completely new arrangement. The teacher understands that it is the flawlessly placed violin part that leads her along without letting go. The warm charm of spring permeating the violin melody somehow gives an echo of deep sadness, as if meeting a loved one. But the spring day that seemed to last forever suddenly ended. At this time, the boy realized with relief that he had played this music, and at that moment, the hall burst into applause. The gentleman exclaimed, "Bravo!" as they considered it a stunning performance, and the young gentleman thanked them for listening to him. The grandfather thought that he missed his daughter, because he remembered that once she also played the violin amazingly. The chairman of the company's son says that this is incredible, and then asks if it is true that he has never studied the violin professionally. Yuka hugged the guy and said that Hyung plays the violin wonderfully, and she and all the other guests were also delighted. The grandfather took his grandson's hands and thanked him. Meanwhile, the boy was confused about how to behave in such situations. He remembers that even in his past life, at similar moments, he suddenly realized that perhaps no answer was needed here. And then he looked at his grandfather. Byamjin asks his father if he'll be coming over again today with his Hyung. He asks why he's asking. Uncle explains that he just noticed yesterday that it was a bit difficult for him because he thinks that at his age, it's better to rest more at home and eat a lot. The guy looked at his uncle and thought that he should better control himself because he could see how nervous he was. Grandfather tells him not to worry because his grandson is going to see the chairman today. Hearing this, the man surprised asks his dad why he needs this. The grandfather turns to the boy and says that the car has already arrived and therefore suggests finishing breakfast. The driver Kim will give him a ride. Sitting in the car, Hyung doesn't understand what's going on and thinks that Yoo-ha asked to take him there because she missed him. A few minutes later, the driver informed the young gentleman that they had arrived. When the boy got out of the car, he thought no matter how hard he looked, the house was quite scary and he had a strange feeling. The boy remembered that in his past life, he had heard that Song Il-sun visited this mansion every time there were problems with the business, and it seems the protagonist thinks he knows why. The man greets the boy, and the girl invites him to come in quickly. Hyun greeted the gentleman and thanked him for the invitation. The man insisted that he should be the one thanking him. Sun reports that Yuka begged him to take violin lessons with her during the holidays. He then says he doesn't even know how he would have coped if the chairman hadn't agreed. The boy asks in surprise if they will learn to play together at their house. The man says, yes, of course. At this time, the guy thought that he would like to once again feel that thrill and that feeling that he had when he stood on stage. The girl took the guy by the hand and asked him to teach her how to solve those problems until the teacher arrived. After some time, Hyun looked at his watch and thought that the teacher should arrive soon. The young lady says that she has decided everything and he offers to see what she has come up with. The pencil mark left an erased mark, and the boy realized she'd been solving the problem over and over again until she'd found the answer. And she'd been mulling over the same problem for half an hour. The protagonist understands that for an 11-year-old child, this is an incredible ability to concentrate, and he does not understand where such strictness comes from. The guy claims that this is the correct answer, and that she is a good girl, and then asks if this isn't too difficult. The young man claims that this is a complex topic, and therefore believes that at her age, there is no need to understand it. The little girl looked at him and said that her dad told her that as soon as she gave in, everything would end, and therefore she should hold on and never let go, because then in the end, it would become hers. Hearing this, the guy thought that this was a passion for education, typical of the heirs of chaebols. The main character understands that this is Uncle Song Wilson. He probably told this to his daughter because she will have to fight with others for the right to be the heir. The boy believes she doesn't have to make something hers, even if it's not what she wants. He knows the time will soon come when he'll need both concentration and the ability to make choices. Chairman Sun knows that if he tries to take over everything, there will be problems, and understands that now Sun Il-sun is far from his father. Yoo-hoo asks if he is talking about the fact that it is not necessary to make something yours, even if she does not need it. The man then asks what he thinks he doesn't need most. Hearing this, the boy doesn't understand how long he's been eavesdropping, and at that moment, she thinks maybe she should just laugh it off. Hyun thinks that this won't work with him, and then says that he has already gotten rid of everything that was not needed. Hearing this, the gentleman was surprised, but at this time, the guy was worried, because he realized that this man could ask him another awkward question. However, the teacher entered the room and greeted the gentleman, and he realized that she had arrived just in time. Sun thanked the lady for yesterday's performance, and she said that it was a great honor for her to perform in such a place. The gentleman turns to the boy and suggests continuing their conversation next time, and then wishes the boys a good lesson. Chairman Sun is one of those who hides a blade behind a smile, and he will mercilessly crush anyone who does not have an inner core. From unpromising branches to untalented offspring, Hyun thinks it would be good if his grandfather could at least partially follow his example. The teacher turns to the children and asks how they will begin their lessons, because she knows that today is their first general lesson. The lady turns to the boy and says that, for now, she will lend him her violin. The boy looked at the sheet music and then told the teacher he couldn't read it. Hearing this, she asked him in surprise how he could play, not understanding how he could do it. Hyun explains that the composition he performed was something he just repeated a couple of times, and he never really learned it properly. The woman, surprised, says that this is impossible, and then suggests that he show his palms. The teacher looked at his hands and realized that they were absolutely clean, and she knew that these were definitely hands that had never studied violin. The woman realized that he really did play, without even knowing the notes, and she wondered if she could play like him in that banquet hall if she were asked, and thinks that perhaps she could imitate. But she knows that such emotions can never be achieved by simple imitation. The lady thought that one way or another, perhaps she was right now, witnessing the birth of a genius who would leave his mark on the music world. The driver suggests to the young gentleman that he better fasten his seatbelt because they will be driving fast. Mr. Song asks the assistant if Hyun has already left because he wanted to offer him tea after class. but Chairman Yu called and understands that it must be something urgent. The man says he's simply an amazing guy, and the gentleman asks if he's jealous. Then he says talent isn't something he already has, but rather something he needs to find and appropriate. The gentleman claims that the little one is truly extraordinary, and he cannot deny it, because sometimes he gets the feeling that he is an inexplicably amazing boy. Chairman of the dream, remember the guy's words about how he had already gotten rid of everything that was unnecessary, and believes that his extraordinary insight is not at all like that of an ordinary child. The gentleman knows that there is a sense of wisdom in him, as if he were talking to an adult, and such children are extremely rare. Father asks Yuha how the lesson went, and she says that Hyun is insanely good, and he is just a genius, and then says that she wants to play like him. Grandpa says that their capricious girl does not skimp on praise, and thinks that it seems that she really liked this guy. At this time, the boy arrived and told the driver that he would go ahead because he would run to quickly get to his grandfather. When the guy entered the room, he saw his mother, and then asked in surprise how she could come without warning, because if she had called, he would have come out to meet her. Mother explains that she herself did not know that she would arrive so suddenly, and then reports that grandfather sent a car for her early in the morning. The woman says that she is not herself because of this, because she took the porridge that she was supposed to leave for his dad. Hyun said that he would go and put it in the refrigerator, and at that time, he thought that he had never even imagined that his grandfather would make such a decision. The boy thought that in his past life, he did not have time to meet his mother again before his own death, but he believes that this time everything is completely different. The main character knows that in this life, everything can be changed and past mistakes can be avoided. The grandfather asks his daughter if it was hard for her to travel so far. She assures him that everything is fine because her father sent a car to pick her up. The daughter asks her father if everything is okay with him, and he assures her that everything is fine with him and that he is still going strong. The maid says that she brought them something to drink, and mother thanked her, and then says with delight that auntie still remembers that she loves ginger tea. The woman smiled and asked how anyone could forget something like that, and then smiled and said that she was the only one in this house who drank it. At this time, the grandfather looked at his daughter and thought that when she was little, her hands felt like just a couple of days ago, she was holding a violin with these small, skillful hands, laughing loudly. The father thought about how time was flying by so quickly, and then turned to Hyunja and said that she had raised her son wonderfully. The man says that Hyun is very mature, even compared to his greedy, shameless brothers. The woman turns to the father and says that you can learn a lot about parents just by looking at their children. The father says they can come together, and he's talking about her husband. He suggests they come together next time. Hearing this, the main character remembered that in his past life, his grandfather never recognized his father as a member of his family. The emotional gap became so deep that they broke off their relationship. The father hugs his daughter and says that he missed her, and the boy realized that the ice has finally melted. The next day, Yuka asks the men why they both didn't go to work today. Grandpa asks if she's the only one who's been thinking about this, and that's why she suddenly decided to pay attention to both Grandpa and Dad. Father says they stayed because they're expecting guests. She looks at them in surprise, and Father explains that she's already met them. The assistant tells the chairman that he is here, and the young lady then suggests that he quickly go and meet them. The man thanks Mr. Sleep for inviting him. Meanwhile, the little girl remembers seeing this man on the news. Yuka knows that he is the foreigner who sat next to her during the banquet, and she became interested in what he does. The chairman says the Silly Hotel's reputation is all thanks to him, Samuel, but the man objects, claiming he didn't do anything wrong. The foreigner claims that this is all thanks to the efforts of Jian Holding, and he just showed his face. The eternal crown prince, Samuel Gardner, was originally not eligible to inherit the throne at all, but he became a replacement for the former prince, who was a real pain in the ass. Now Samuel enjoys popularity and support in his homeland, and when the prince's visit to South Korea is covered in the news, the Silly Hotel always looms behind him. He wondered if it was worth discussing the impact this was having. The chairman understood that this was an advertising effect that no amount of money could buy. The guest asks Mr. Sun if he can ask him for a favor. He tells him that Hyun was performing the violin that evening and asks if he has a video. The man says he thought he saw someone filming that day. The chairman says it shouldn't be too hard to get hold of him, then asks why. Samuel says that it's nothing special, because one of his old friends plays classical music, and that's why he really wants to show him this performance. At this point, the man asks his assistant if they don't have any decent French horn players. He then explains that he's replacing the accompanist, and can't understand how he couldn't hit a single note. Dmitri claims he's terrorizing everyone again with his perfectionism. Hearing this, the man screams and insists. It's not he who's a perfectionist, but rather that they're all just too relaxed. The man says that he is asking for forgiveness, but he did not come here to give recommendations, but to say that someone called him. Spencer picked up the phone and asked what it was about. William wanted to know how his good old friend was doing. The man asked why he was calling so inappropriately late. The gentleman says that they haven't called each other for a long time, and asks why he's so angry. William says that he is now in Korea, and the man asks in surprise why His Majesty the Crown Prince, who is responsible for all their people, suddenly left for Korea. The gentleman explains that he found an amazingly gifted young man here, and it was as if he saw him in the prime of his life. The man says that he doesn't believe that this guy is gifted, because he thinks that after Mozart all talent died out. The prince insists it's true, saying he'll find the video of his performance and definitely listen to it. The musician says he's done with the nonsense, and then says he's hanging up and turning off his phone. The man says that with age, he has completely lost his mind, because he doesn't understand whether there are still gifted people in this world, and thinks that this is some kind of nonsense, and not a conversation. At this time, the woman turns to Dad and says that they have already arrived. She reports that she prepared food for him, but does not know if he will like it. When the lady saw Hyunja, she screamed and asked what she was doing here, and the man asked what her fates were, and how she wasn't ashamed to return. Hearing this, the grandfather shouts and orders them all to sit down, and then says that he wants to tell them something. Father says that he gathered them here to talk about the future of Dongju Chemical, and then he announces that from today on, Hyunja will also take part in the management of the company. Hearing this, the man and woman scream and turn to their father and ask what he is talking about, since they think this is complete nonsense. The son claims that he is letting someone who has never called him in decades make decisions, and what's worse is that he is letting some laundress run the company. Benjamin says that he understands that he hasn't seen his daughter for a long time, and that's why he's so worried now, and then suggests that she think about it again. The father asks if he heard that the position of chairman of Songsun Holding was taken by a widow because the housewife's husband died, and now she is managing such a large company. The gentleman claims that when it comes to business, he asks what's more important, gender or ability, and then he asserts that neither has yet demonstrated any results. Hearing this, the main character thought that this was very different from his past life. Grandfather preferred not his uncle, who was only good at disappointing, and who received the status of heir only on the basis of gender, but his mother, who was distinguished by her abilities. The boy realized that his grandfather had changed, and the future had changed, and he was even happy about it. A month has passed since they started their violin lessons, with Yoo Ha-hyun realizes it's so much fun that he always wonders why he didn't do this in his past life. The teacher asks how he achieved such a wonderful tone, and the girl insists that he really is a natural-born genius, and therefore asks to play it again. At this time, the woman looked at the guy and thought about how no matter what side you look at him from, but he is simply talented. The boy senses music like a blank sheet of paper absorbs a drop of paint. The teacher knows this boy possesses a talent she could never have dreamed of. Pak reflects that instead of envy and inferiority, she feels her heart skip a beat. The teacher understands that devoting oneself entirely to teaching someone is such a wonderful experience, and so she really wants to see how they grow up. Yuka asks the guy if he will really return home after the holidays, and then asks him to stay here and not leave. Hyun thought about how much had changed since his past life, and now everything had become so unpredictable, and then he said that he was still thinking about it. The girl enthusiastically suggests that he then decide not to go, because she really enjoys spending time with him. The grandfather asks the boy if he's probably not interested in spending time with an old man in the office. He counters that it's good that they spend time together. The man says it would be nice if his mother stayed a few more days. Then he remembers that she said she was worried about her husband and left without giving a clear answer. After this, as expected, her relatives immediately began to take even more care of her grandfather. The son tells his father that his birthday is coming up soon, and the daughter wanted to cook him his favorite dishes, and therefore controls everything right down to the soy sauce. Uncle says that Soyeon also wanted to see him, and cried so much that they didn't know what to do. Hearing this, the main character smiled, and thought that he was talking about a baby who couldn't even speak yet. The father asks what his shameless face is doing here, and then looks at him angrily, and asks if he even knows what he has done. The gentleman claims that he occupies his position in the company solely thanks to him, and let's say, we can turn a blind eye to this. The father claims that this is not enough for him, and he hired a bunch of incompetent good-for-nothings who only know how to lick his shoes. The chairman claims he raised criminals, and then screams that he's a fool. After all, the newspapers reported that their company was suspected of illegal financial fraud. Baeom-gyung falls to his knees and asks his father to forgive him at least one more time, and then explains that it was an accident and he can fix everything. Father says that he has stopped begging and informs him that from tomorrow onwards, he should not even think of appearing in company. The man reflects that Hyunja is probably still in her thoughts, and the guy looked at him and thought that his grandfather was worried about so much, and that besides his youngest daughter, he had no children he could trust. The main character understands that his grandfather has changed, and if he offers him an alternative, maybe he will agree. Hyun says that he wasn't worried, and if the truth doesn't come out, he can consult with professionals. Hearing this, the gentleman smiled and agreed with the guy, and then said that he was very smart. The advisor turns to the chairman and asks for forgiveness, and then says that he came regarding the development of new materials. Hyun looked at this man and thought that he had felt this before, but still did not understand how he was so familiar to him. The boy realized that he had not imagined it, and that he had seen him in his past life, but he still could not remember where he could have met him. Suddenly, the guy remembered that Chan was the man who leaked new developments abroad, which caused the entire domestic business to suffer, starting with Dongju Chemical. In the future, this incident would be named after the traitor himself. At that time, the criminal's appearance and name had not yet been made public. The boy thought that he would not have noticed it if he had not participated in that investigation as a novice prosecutor. Hyun reflects on the irony of fate, but in this life, he will not allow the company to go down, because he knows that this degenerate is like a cancerous tumor. The guy became interested in how he could catch it, because he knew that everything had to be done very quietly and carefully. The boy looked at his grandfather and asked in surprise what had happened. He replied that nothing had happened, and explained that his grandfather simply had a gloomy face. Hyun wondered if it was all because of his uncle. Hearing this, the man thought he was a very smart guy. The gentleman understands that Hyun is already quite smart, and recently he's been observing how he works. And naturally, he sensed the atmosphere prevailing in the company. And the chairman understands that he doesn't have much longer to live, because everyone who is laying claim to his inheritance has no idea what they are doing. The grandfather became curious about what would happen to the company when he was gone, and then told the boy not to worry, because he would take care of everything himself. At this time, the main character does not know what to do, and considers whether it is possible to simply tell his grandfather that a bastard traitor has appeared in Dongju. The guy realizes this is a great idea to gain a reputation as a crazy person, and then says that mold never grows in just one place. Hearing this, the man asks, surprised what he's getting at. Hyun explains that when you work in a laundry, you have a lot of contact with clothes, and sometimes they get moldy. The boy says the owner is only concerned about the outside of the garment, unaware that mold can also grow inside, although it's obvious they're the same thing. Hearing this, the grandfather thought that he was right, because he knew that the rotten part could quickly swallow up everything else. And if he leaves it for a while, it will spoil completely. The man wondered why he was talking about this. The chairman remembered his employees and what they do, and looked at the boy, and thought that this child really sees through everything. The gentleman informs the maestro that demand for foreign artists is currently growing in Asian countries. He asks him to elaborate. The man says he's in South Korea and Japan. Meanwhile, Samuel comes over and greets Spencer. He says he really wanted to see him, and that's why he came quickly, and then suggests looking at this tape because it contains the performances of this guy he was talking about. The maestro says that now he understands where the problem is buried, and then he offers to take it away, because he doesn't want to be an eyesore with useless nonsense. The man grabs his hand and asks just once, and begs him not to judge until he listens. Spencer looked at the man and realized that normally he would have turned around and left as soon as he heard a refusal, but he didn't understand why he was so persistent now. The maestro took the tape and claimed that he would do it, but only once, and after that, he should not dare waste his time anymore. Spencer looked at the video and thought that this boy didn't really stand out in appearance, and therefore he couldn't wait to see what a prodigy he really was. When the maestro heard the melody, he thought that this playing was simply unthinkable, because the mind could not comprehend what he had just heard. Samuel asks how he's doing with this guy, thinks he's doing better than he expected, and wonders if that's true. Then he reminds him that he already said this boy was a genius. The musician asks where this guy is from. Then he turns to Dmitri and informs him that they're flying to South Korea for their next performance. At this time, sitting in the car, the main character does not understand where he decided to go early in the morning, and thinks that it could be some kind of royal reception. The guy wondered why they were driving up the mountain. The driver told the boss that they had already arrived. The man turns to the gentleman and asks how he is doing, and the grandfather says that they haven't seen each other for a long time. Hyun looked to the left and saw that it was a cemetery, and realized that it was his grandmother's grave. The grandfather tells his grandson that he wants to tell him something, and then says that he met his grandmother at about the same age as he is now. The man explains that she looked after the household at home, And when they grew older, they decided to get married, but their parents were categorically against it. Grandfather says that's when they ran away from home and came to the capital. Then grandmother asked if they would regret it. Grandpa asks if he knows what he answered. Then he tells him he already holds the whole world in his hand and asks what else he might regret. The gentleman says that if you combine the second syllable and the last syllable of her full name, you get Donju. The man explains that this company is irreplaceable for him, which is why it has such a name. Grandfather thinks that many things in life don't go as planned, and then asks his grandson if he likes music. Director Yu says that he is still so inept at handling everything, and then screaming asks whether he should deal with the wastewater himself. The man bowed his head and assured the chairman that he would immediately take the necessary measures, and then left. A few minutes later, Advisor Chan enters the office, and the chairman asks what business he came for. The advisor explains that he wanted to clarify something regarding the documents on the development of the new material. When the young gentleman saw this man, he became interested in how he was supposed to catch this bastard. The boy understands that he has been skipping violin lessons for the last few days in order to control the situation, but he still can't figure out how to stop it. Hyun thinks that he wants to somehow calm his grandfather down and remembers the words that he told him, that he can go anyway because there are no wrong options. Grandfather says that there is nothing better than living life the way he wants, and therefore he has one request. The chairman said that if the company ever needed his help, he asked him not to refuse. The boy reassured him and said that everything would be fine with his company. The young man doesn't understand what to do after such words. Chan apologized to the chairman and left the office. At that moment, the grandfather looked at his grandson and said that the mold had a rather pungent odor. Hyun looked at him in surprise, and the man explained that he himself had recently told him that mold on clothes grows not only on the outside. Grandpa claims they'll soon sterilize everything clean. The boy thought he understood everything. The kid knows that his grandfather has worked in the forefront of business circles all his life, and thinks that it would be foolish of him to rely only on his past life experience. And of course, his grandfather figured it all out himself. After these words, the guy came to music lessons, and the teacher tells the girl that she plays much better than last time. Yuka says with delight that of course she rehearsed so diligently and knows that this part is difficult, but she practiced. Hyun looked at the teacher and asked what was bothering her. She smiled and asked if it showed. The little girl, surprised, asks, "What's wrong?" The teacher says that frankly she's worried because her skills haven't improved at all lately. The girl asks in surprise if even experts like her are worried about this, and the boy thinks it's true because there's no end to learning. The guy thinks that she must be really good, since she was entrusted with training the heiress of the chaebol. Hyun knows how worried she is that she decided to tell the children about it, and then he says that he just realized he's never seen her play the violin. The girl says that he was right, because she used to do this more often, and claims that the teacher plays wonderfully, but although she still likes the guy's performance more. The woman smiled and said that in that case, she would perform something, and asked her Hyung if he would give his comments. Hearing this, the boy asked in surprise if she was talking about him, and the lady insisted that of course because he had been able to catch the mistake while she was playing the piano. The teacher claims that's why she thinks he's the one who can figure out what's wrong. The boy agreed and she began playing. The woman asks how she played, and the boy says that it was flawless, and thinks that there was indeed something disappointing in the performance, although at first glance, there was nothing to find fault with. Hyun doesn't understand what the problem is, and then tells the teacher that when she plays, he asks if she thinks one beat ahead in her head. The boy insists that it's especially the part where the bow alternates between up and down. She says it's correct and does it to ensure there's not a single mistake. Hyun thinks that's the whole point. She's trying too hard to play perfectly, then she insists the performance itself was flawless. He says that when technology advances enough to recreate the sound of a violin, it will be much the same, and her desire to perform perfectly was a mistake in itself. The guy says that when the technique of performance is perfected to the limit, the melody suffers destruction. At this time, the woman tells the maestro that he did a good job today, and asks if he would like to look at the recording of the performance right now. Spencer asks Dimitri if he thinks there are such things as innate talents. He says he doesn't even know, but it's true that there are musicians with varying talents. The man says he thought talent was useless without effort and experience until he learned about this guy because his game got stuck in his head. The maestro says he can't wait for the concert in Korea, and he's curious who his mentor is. Dimitri says that no matter what, if a child is so talented, then everyone will want to make him their student. Hearing this, the maestro wondered why he hadn't thought of this before. After all, he knows there are other people besides him who want to get their hands on him. At this time, the main character thought that he had already been to this place, because this was the Kapyeong Country Club that Chairman Wang had worked so hard on. This is a private golf club that is closed to ordinary people, and even the son of the chairman of the Sun cannot enter there without permission. The boy remembers how he tried so hard to get into this club in his past life. His grandfather asks how he's feeling. The boy assures that everything is fine, and the chairman of the Sun says that he envies his grandfather because he has such a sensible grandson. The gentleman explains that his granddaughter Yuka said that her legs hurt and stayed home, but he is afraid that she will regret it if she finds out that he also came. Meanwhile, in the family's house, the little girl found out that Hyun would also be there and very angrily says that her grandfather is bad. The gentleman asks the chairman about his request. He explains that the video reached the Japanese, and they recently called and said that Ms. Hiroshi wants to meet with Hyun. Hearing this, the boy realized that Hirose was known by the nickname Queen of Strings. The empress of the musical world Hirose had become famous far beyond Japan's borders and a maestro of global stature. And he was surprised that this woman wanted to see him. Hyun doesn't understand what the video is all about and thinks it has something to do with his game. Mr. Sun says that, of course, it is necessary for someone intelligent to inherit Donju chemical, and then asks if he himself would not be sorry if such talent were to go to waste. The grandfather asks the boy if he'd like to study abroad. He replies he doesn't, and the man, surprised, asks if he enjoys playing music. Hyun says it's fun, and at that time, he thought that he knows his grandfather cares about him as much as he was once unable to care for his daughter. The guy knows that he has just over 5 years left to live, and so he doesn't want to waste precious time studying abroad. And he himself decided not to regret anything. The gentleman says that he probably doesn't know who it is, and then says that Mrs. Hirose is very famous. The guy claims that it doesn't matter how famous she is, because he doesn't want to go abroad just to meet someone he doesn't even know personally. The boy says that if she really wants to meet him, then why doesn't she come herself? Hearing this, Mr. Sleep stroked the boy's head and smiled, and then said that now he understood why his granddaughter had such a crush on him. The old man turns to the chairman and suggests that he remember his promises. The grandfather asks if his memory is getting worse. At this time, the boy thought that he had a feeling as if his future was being determined without his participation. The assistant approaches the chairman and whispers something in his ear. Then he informs him that one of his guests is very eager to meet Hyun. Yuka asks the man who he is. The man looks at her and doesn't understand what she's talking about. At this time, the girl realized that she was not very good at English. The gentleman shows the girl a photograph of a boy, and she realizes that it is Hyun. The young lady saw the guy and said that he had come, and then told her uncle that it was him, the guy in the photo. Grandfather offers to introduce himself to the guest. Hyun greets the gentleman and says he was told he was looking for him. The maestro offers the boy his hand and says he's really looking forward to meeting him. The boy is surprised to hear this, then apologizes and reminds him he didn't introduce himself. The gentleman says that he is Spencer, the conductor of the Volante Orchestra at the London Philharmonic, and when he saw the recording of his performance, he immediately rushed over. Hearing this, the young man thought that the recording of the performance had already been mentioned when they were talking about Hirose. The man claims that he will be straightforward and therefore offers to come play in their orchestra. Hearing this, the boy was surprised, and the gentleman explained that, of course, at first, he would be off staff with them because he knew that for permanent membership, he still needed to develop the skills. Spencer says that if he really is the guy from the video, he will definitely take him onto his team. Volante is a symphony orchestra from London that represents the whole of Great Britain, and the main character realized that they were going to make him a member. The conductor says that he still wants to hear him play the violin and asks if it would be too much trouble for him to do so right now. At this time, the girl listening to their conversation barely heard a familiar word and asked if he needed a violin and said that she would bring it now. Hyun took the violin in his hands and thought that this is exactly how musicians felt about you at social gatherings with nobles. The guy thought that, frankly, he wasn't very happy, but it was all so sudden. But he realized that this man from Great Britain had come here for him. And this isn't just any man, but the chief conductor of London's Volante. The boy thinks it would be impolite to refuse. Hyun took the violin and said that he would play but only once, and therefore suggested that we listen to him well and attentively. At this time, the woman finished playing, and then came to her dressing room and asked her assistant if she had received a call from Korea. The man says they haven't called yet. Then the guy comes in and says it was a great honor to perform with her today. Hirose approached the young man and said that he had tried hard today, and then apologized for not being able to pay much attention to him today. Chung-hoon assures that everything is fine, because he considered her his idol since childhood, and collaborating with the Queen of Strings herself was the dream of his whole life. The guy says his heart is still pounding, The woman asks if he's from Korea and if he knows any violinists there that she might like. Hirose explains that these should not be adults, but rather talented children. Chung-hoon says that he doesn't even know, because South Korea isn't very famous in the world of classical music, but he thinks that among the young guys, there are those who can satisfy it. The assistant asks the lady if she is too worried about this child, and he hints that there is probably a similar child prodigy in Japan. Hearing this, the guy doesn't understand what kind of child they're talking about, and the lady assures him that there are no such children in this city or country. Hirose thought that this guy was made of different stuff, and all she knew was that he was the heir to a chaebol. The woman thought that he had never participated in an international competition before, and did not understand where he came from. At this time, the main character thought that he still had that feeling. When the maestro heard the music, he realized it was Bach and one of the 6 unaccompanied violin pieces. He created this composition out of grief for his deceased wife. The violin's sound is majestic, as if accompanied by an invisible organ. And it's not enough to simply understand the musical aspect of the piece. It's also important to be mature enough to convey its message. Spencer doesn't understand how he did it, and then he clenched his fist because he realized that he had been terribly stupid. After all, back then, he was impressed, but now he is sure that this guy's talent is much deeper than all his knowledge of music. Grandpa's friend says that he really doesn't know what to do with it, and asks why he's worried. The man says that his Hyung is smart, and he can take care of himself, but of course he needs to think about company. Grandpa says that whatever Hyun chooses, he probably has his reasons for it. The protagonist said that his offer of freelance collaboration would not be considered rude, but he would not be able to accept it. The maestro thought that he did not expect such an answer, but strangely enough, he was not at all upset, because this guy's eyes clearly realized his uniqueness more than anyone else. Spencer knew that was why no one would be able to get him so easily, and if you remember, his hand is completely whole and unharmed. The conductor was thinking that after Mozart, the earth had not produced any musical geniuses, and then he realized that Samuel was right. Chung-hoon couldn't concentrate while rehearsing, and thought that this boy was a damn idiot, because he was incredibly happy when he got the chance to perform with Mrs. Hirose. The man reflects on how he thought he was finally honored to stand next to someone like her. Chung-hoon knows that in the midst of his performance, he made a mistake so tiny that the audience would hardly notice it, but the maestro did. However, even then, with her smooth melody, she managed to hide this error as if nothing had happened. The guy thinks that his arrogance ruined her game, and now he can't forgive himself for it. At this point, the mistress asks Auntie if father is in his office. The maid informs her that he and Hyun haven't been home since early morning, and that they've flown to Japan. A grandfather asks his grandson if this is his first time flying on a plane. The boy says yes and finds it amazing. The old man says that it is not necessary to take off your shoes on the plane, and the guy says that he really didn't know this, and at that time thought that he did it on purpose and is glad that it amused him. Hyun looked at the Narita airport and thought that it was not much different from the future. The boy became curious as to why his grandfather had suddenly suggested going to Japan. The young man believes that he decided to go on a trip because his vacation will soon end. Hyun says there's a place he'd like to go to. They're sitting in a cafe for a few minutes, and Grandpa asks, surprised how he knows about it. The boy explains that he saw in some magazine and was told that this is a very popular restaurant. The protagonist recalls that he used to go there every time he came to Tokyo because the elderly couple who owned the place reminded him of his parents. The grandfather says that he received a call and that he will come now, and then he leaves and leaves the guy alone. Hyun looked at the guy at the next table, saw his hands, and realized he was playing the piano. After all, his passion for music didn't subside, even while he was eating. The boy watched his hand movement and became curious about what kind of performance this was. Within a minute, the guy came up to him and said that this was a very skillful performance. Chung-hoon doesn't understand where such a child came from and asks such questions and then asks what's the matter. The young man claims that he is rehearsing everything and that it is Brahms' Sonata No. 3 for violin. Hearing this, the man does not understand how he did it, because it is generally impossible to recognize a song by one finger movement. Hyun says that of course the interpretation of the piece depends on the performer, but it's also not worth getting stuck in one role. The boy says that his desire for perfection does not allow him to show all the potential of his left hand, which is drowning in the sadness, and is forced to perform low tones. The young man claims that he would be better off making live music, but he is playing something that died hundreds of years ago. Hearing this, the guy thought that he was trying to understand the notes so as not to let down Mrs. Hirose and not make mistakes. Browse's music seemed contradictory to him, and he understands that even then, he should have said that this music died hundreds of years ago. Chung-hoon wanted to say something to the boy, but saw that there was no one, and realized that he was deep in thought and didn't even notice when he left. Grandfather says that the building is called Opera City, and the boy says with delight that it is a solo concert in such a huge building. The man says that he will be honest with him and that he has reserved tickets for Hiros's concert tomorrow, and then asks if he will go with him. The old man explains that he said he didn't want to study abroad, so he thought it would be nice to at least give him that experience. Hyun says with delight that he agrees and can't wait for that day. At this time, the young man thought about Hiros, and he could not even imagine that he would ever listen to the performance of the Queen of Strings herself. The boy thought about why his grandfather had invited him to Japan. The old man suggested they return to the hotel and get a good rest before tomorrow. The gentleman looked at the boy and thought that his talent was not meant for some tiny stage, and he wanted to let him see more, hear more, and enrich his life with different experiences. The grandfather thought that he wanted to give him everything that he could not give to his daughter. The next day, a lot of people gathered at Opera City, and the boy thanks his grandfather for bringing him here, because the stage is very close. The man says that he is glad that he likes it, and informs that the concert will start soon, and therefore suggests that they sit comfortably. When the gentleman came on stage, the boy remembered that it was the man from yesterday's ramen shop, and then looked at the ticket that it was the accompanist Chung-hoon. The young man knows that this is the maestro, and he is still young, so he is completely unrecognizable, and he felt embarrassed for telling him this. When the woman came on stage, she noticed the boy who was sitting in the front row. Hiros pointed her bow at him and said that she had finally found him. At this time, the main character thought that she had just pointed at him, and then began to play Brahms' Sonata No. 3 for violin. The Stradivarius, bathed in moonlight, quietly curls, and when the melody returns like a nightlight, it suddenly collapses in a thunderous storm. The boy realized that it was a piano, and it was amazing because he only pushed it slightly, and this maestro mastered it in such a short time. The guy understands that it's not for nothing that he's called the maestro of blood and iron, but the main character in this composition is, of course, the violin. She envelops him in a melody full of love and condescension. The insistent piano seems driven to the edge of a cliff, and the boy realized he really wanted to hear this performance from Mrs. Hiros. After the concert, my grandfather said that it was the first time he had seen someone play the violin like that. The guy says he really liked it too. Meanwhile, a man approaches them and says he's Ms. Hiros's manager, Hasegawa Goro. I asks if they have a minute. The young man asks in surprise what happened, and the man explains that the thing is that Mrs. Hiros expressed a desire to meet with him. Chung-hoon comes into the ladies' room and asks her to forgive him, and she surprised asks, what's the matter and why he's apologizing. The guy says that he made a lot of mistakes, but it was so hard and awkward to admit it that he didn't tell her. The maestro claims that his mistakes also influenced her performance, and therefore he offers his sincere apologies. The woman reports that today they played Brahms's third sonata, and thinks that his interpretation was wonderful, and in comparison to what happened a couple of days ago, it was like night and day. The lady thinks that's enough reason to apologize. The young man explains that, in fact, a guy helped him, and he doesn't know his name. And at this time, the manager comes into the room and informs them that those she wanted to see have arrived. Chung-hoon was very surprised when he saw the guy, and the boy realized that this was, of course, an expected reaction, and did not understand whether it was necessary to stare as if he saw a ghost. The main character thought that if he had known then that the pianist he met in some temporary place was Paek Chun himself, Chung-hoon. Hiroshi offers the boy her hand and says that she is pleased to meet him, and then says that she really wanted to see him. At this time, Hyung does not understand why he has a strange feeling, and then remembers that in his past life, by the time he became a fan of Hiros, she had already died. The young man realized that he had no choice but to listen to her recordings again and again. The main character cannot believe that they have met under such circumstances, and then says that he is also glad to meet them, because it is a great honor for him, and shakes her hand. When the woman saw the boy's fingers, she was surprised, and then said that it would be strange if it turned out that such a level of skill was achieved through effort alone. Hiros says that she was charmed by his performance, and if it weren't for the concerts, she would have flown to Korea a long time ago, and then asks the boy if he would like to arrange an exchange of experience. Hearing this, Chung-hoon thought that she did not want to teach him, but to exchange experiences, and this meant that she recognized this child as a worthy performer. The man thought that the guy from this establishment was the very boy that Mrs. Hiros was looking for. Hyun was a little surprised, and the lady asked if he had any doubts, and then opened the violin and asked if he could play it once. Seeing this, the man thought that her instrument was something that any violinist would like to receive. After all, she has one of the best Stradivarius violins in the world, and it is a violin in which life flows. Journalists greet Mr. Bayek, and ask him to tell them what it was like to collaborate with the Japanese maestro Miss Hirose. Hyun reports that it was a great honor because he perceived this experience more as a mentorship because Mrs. Hirose is simply incomparable. The woman says that as far as she knows, Mrs. Hirose also has a high opinion of him. The lady reports that she stated that he has every chance of becoming a maestro in the world of Korean classics, and then asks what he thinks about it. The man explains that it's a bit inappropriate, but he thinks Korean classical music is about to face major changes. A grandfather asks his grandson how he likes the hot springs. The boy says everything is great, and he wants to go there again sometime. Hyun wonders if Grandpa takes good care of his health, and the old man smiled and told him not to worry, because he too would be perfectly fine for another 10 years. Hearing this, the guy remembered that his grandfather had about 5 years left, and he still had so much to deal with. Grandfather asks why he didn't play her violin. The boy, surprised, asks how he knew about it. The old man smiled and asked if he really thought that his grandfather didn't speak Japanese, and then said that he knew how good he was at music, better than anyone else. The gentleman says he's still curious why he turned down Hirose's offer. After all, he knows he needs her most now. After hearing this, the guy thought that he didn't even know that his grandfather cared so much about it, and then said that he would be lying if he said that he didn't feel the same way. Hyun thought that he felt that if he had taken that violin back then and played it, he would never have been able to return home again. The boy suggests to his grandfather that he never gets sick, and the old man asks why he ignores his questions. Yuka saw the guy. She ran up to him and asked how their trip was, and said that she missed him. Hyun hugs the girl and says that everything is fine, and at this time the grandfathers watched them and smiled. The boy says that he brought her gifts, and the girl claims that he is the best. Mr. Sleep, watching them, thought that his daughter already preferred some guy to her own father. Grandfather says it's high mountain tea and invites them to try it. The gentleman looked at the boy and thought that this young man also knows a thing or two about tea. The man asks Wilson if he's already discussing plant locations. He tells his father not to worry about it because he'll figure it all out. A conflict then arose between Gyeonggi and other provinces to attract Jahan electronics factories to their region. The situation has escalated to the limit and has spread to Korean regionalism as a whole. Wilson's career. The gentleman asks how politicians will address this issue. He replies that they've passed the matter on to members of the regional administration. Winston reports that they will soon be confirmed to move to the business center of Hwasong City. Hearing this, the main character thought that Wilson still lacked wisdom and experience. The fact that they lobbied only a few regional politicians ultimately led to opposition from other parties. The man didn't know then that these were people who simply wanted to line their pockets instead of developing the regions. Grandfather turns to Hyung and says that he has a question for him, and then he says that if two hooligans wanted to take his things, he wonders what he would do. Hearing this, the boy wondered if he was trying to probe him too openly, and knew that he didn't really want to get involved in conversations about politics. Hyun says that in order not to give away his things, he must please them in another way. Grandpa wonders where that baduk player went. His friend insists he's an old man who only eats and plays baduk. The man claims that he lost, and that he cannot be beaten, even with complicated rules. And Grandpa claims that he won't even count the points. The chairman assures that the Hyung is very similar to him, and knows that Wilson is still too weak-willed, and that pine trees and azaleas are different, but can grow on the same fertilizers. The gentleman claims that if you give one something that the other does not have, the second will begin to envy, and such fundamental things still need to be understood. The chairman claims that this understanding seems to be innate to Hyungs. The boy thought that he understood perfectly well what they were talking about, but he did not understand how this could happen at such a young age, and who would know what was going on there. A friend asks what he'll do with Hyun's school. Grandpa explains that he should go with him to Seoul when the holidays are over. The gentleman thinks that there will be trouble, because Yuha will ask to go to Icheondong every time, and then asks if he has forgotten about the promise. The teacher excitedly says that this is Maestro Hirose's album, and that it even has her autograph, and then thanks the boy. The lady asks how he likes her performance, knowing that he saw her in person. Hyun says she's truly the queen of strings, and that says it all. The girl asks the teacher if she wants the cookies Hyun brought. The lady watching the boy thought that he was learning quickly from the performance itself, right down to musical notation, without a single mistake. The teacher understands that, on the contrary, she sometimes has to ask him for advice. Pak asks the boy if he wants to take part in the competition. Yuka asks curiously what kind of competition it is, and the lady explains that it is an international competition, and they look at age and experience, but thinks that a letter of recommendation will suffice. The teacher says that the level is high, because the competition is worldwide, but it will be a very valuable experience for him, Hyung. The guy says he's not particularly interested in ratings. Hearing this, the woman asserts that if he wins, it will give him a big advantage. The boy thought that he was learning to play because he liked music, and not because he wanted to compete with someone. The main character is confident that he can earn as much as he needs without competitions, so he doesn't care about the prize money either. Hyun knows that he doesn't want to live like last time, chasing money and power, to satisfy his own vanity. The teacher says that if he wins, he will be exempted from military service. Hearing this, the boy stood up and asked if it was true. At that moment, he thought about how long ago he had served in the army, that he had completely forgotten about those times. The guy remembers that in his past life, he was credited for serving as a military judge, but he knows that this time he will definitely have to join the army. The protagonist understands that he shouldn't expect any help from the family of the Cheeble's heirs, either, as their family has been serving on the front lines for several generations. Hyun knows it wouldn't be surprising if he were sent away somewhere far away, and he doesn't want to devote part of his precious youth, miraculously given to him by a new life, to defending the state. The guy thought that competition is still important, and that it is a great chance to test one's capabilities, and the competition is a good platform to demonstrate one's abilities. The young man understands that of course he can do it, and even if Beethoven himself suddenly comes to life and comes to the competition, he will not give him the victory. The man asks the grandfather if he thinks the board will flip over if he looks at it like that. The dream asks if he knows anything about violins, and the gentleman asks in surprise if he is interested in his grandson. The man explains that more expensive violins can cost a fortune, and they say that Mrs. Hiros's violin cost around $40,000 back in the 60s. The gentleman says that even apartments in New York were cheaper back then, but now the price has probably increased tenfold. Wilson reports that it will be difficult to get one of these, unless someone puts it up for auction. The dream says that he knew that it was expensive, but not to that extent. And now he understands why they say that such a violin is worth its weight in gold. Grandpa approaches the chairman of the dream and asks, "How about placing bets on this round?" Bomjin came to his father's house, and kneeling near the door, cried out asking for another chance. The father asks if he knows what he did wrong. The son explains that he himself didn't know what the manager was doing. The man assures that he will improve, and that this person will be punished, and this will become a warning to others, and therefore he believes that he no longer has anything to worry about. The gentleman claims that his son is a fool, and asks if he still thinks that only the manager is involved in this. Father says he has had enough, and doesn't want to hear anything else. Bomjin screams and asks his father to give him just one chance. The grandfather turns to the boy and says that he has a task for him, and then says that if he makes the grandfather smile, he will give him something. At this time, a man entered the office and greeted the chairman, and the guy looked at him and thought that the rats his uncle had brought were still working here. New Materials Development Advisor. Chan is the one who leaked all the developments abroad in his past life. Chan shows a report on new developments, and the gentleman says that it is good work. The boy watching him does not understand why he occupies this position because he thinks that he should be an actor with such talent. Hyun knows that he needs to be removed in the name of protecting the company, and he is sure that it was with this document that Jong carried out his vile deeds. The guy understands that it's probably difficult to navigate the paperwork associated with the development of materials since everything there is new. The young man realizes that it is time to enter the game and then asks his grandfather if he can read this report. Hyun thought that he would not let Dongju Chemical go bankrupt a second time. At this time, the grandfather watching his grandson thought that he knew that this guy was certainly smart, but he wondered if he could figure it out. The protagonist understands that these documents are related to the privacy law applied to new developments. Hyun asks Grandpa about the new materials added to Advisor Chan's report and suggests checking to see if he thinks that particular part is full of ambiguous wording. The boy says that the strength of the contract depends on the words used in it, and although they are similar, there is still a slight difference, and this difference radically changes the meaning. The young man claims that according to Advisor Chan's formulations, the new materials are not necessarily exclusive developments of Dongju Chemical. The court's decision will be made in accordance with the company's adopted provisions, and with such an agreement, obtaining legal protection will be difficult. Grandfather asks if this means that if Advisor Chan sells their company's developments, the company will not be able to hold him liable. In the 1990s, laws were relatively lenient, so these types of fraud flourished. This period is called the Golden Age of Scammers. The protagonist understands that in addition, Dongju does not have a team of lawyers, and the company will inevitably face such problems. And Chang took advantage of the chaos of that era and sold the company's exclusive developments abroad. The grandfather looked at the guy in surprise and asked how he knew all this. He thought that in his past life, such checks were his way of earning money, but he couldn't talk about it. Hyun explains that he saw something similar on the news, and a couple of days ago they reported on a similar incident. The boy realizes that, judging by his expression, he doesn't really believe him, but his grandfather agrees and says he's truly won over, then smiles. Hyun excitedly reminds him that his grandfather smiled and that they had just agreed on a gift. The old man says that he is a crook and therefore suggests asking for what he wants. The assistant turns to the gentleman and welcomes him back. The man says that there is a lot to do today. The son turns to his father and informs him that he will answer there until he receives his forgiveness, and therefore begs him to give him at least one chance. The gentleman looked at this son and invited him to go inside, and then they began to have dinner together. The maid looked at the wet man and asked if she should bring him a change of clothes. He quietly whispered for her to disappear. When the boy heard this, he realized that he had been deliberately pretending to be pathetic and remembered that in the morning he was wearing something different. Hyun thought that while he and his grandfather were leaving, he probably had time to rest and change his clothes. The young man understands that even if he paid attention to this, it is impossible that his grandfather did not notice. The gentleman turns to Byung-Yi and states that he will not repeat himself twice, and therefore suggests that he forget about managing the company. Hearing this, the uncle turns to his father with a cry and claims that he only failed to keep an eye on his subordinates once, and then asks if he is not too harsh with him. The man claims that if he had known and had not allowed this to happen, it would have happened without his knowledge. Grandfather turns to Hyun and offers him to go out for a minute, and the boy thanks him for the food and leaves. Baeomgyung asks his father to listen to him because he could not do anything about that theft. Hearing these words, the father came up to him and hit him in the face, and then said that he couldn't even imagine how many problems the rats he bred were causing. The gentleman calls him a blockhead and claims that he was given control of the company, but he still does not understand the responsibility that comes with this power. The father screams and says that he doesn't want to see him and wants him to leave here and not be an eyesore. Baeomgyung thinks that he was wrong and asks very pitifully to forgive him because this will be the last time, and then falls to the floor again. Meanwhile, the main character thought that if we take into account the potential losses to the company, what his grandfather did to him was nothing at all. The assistant informs the chairman that he has found what he asked for, and the gentleman asks where the auction will take place. The man says that the opening will be in New York, and the expected offer price. He shows a piece of paper on which the amount is indicated. The gentleman thought that he assumed that it would be expensive, but not that much, and then he claims that they simply have to win the bidding. The entrepreneur sleeps believing that the future Zatok is no slouch, and he must surprise him at all costs. At this time, the boy sitting in music class realized that his ear was red and thought that someone was gossiping about him. The teacher asked Hyun how he liked the game and whether it sounded strange. The boy thought she was still peppering him with questions. Yuka says that she is the best, and the guy thought about how such people are called talented hard workers. The young man says that he has been wanting to say something for a long time, and then says that her posture looks wrong. The lady was surprised to hear this, and he asked if she had been playing the violin since childhood. She replied that she had, and the boy thinks that perhaps this is why posture is so cardboard-like, that it can be printed on in textbooks. Hyun says that this is a bit of a misdirection, as she is so obsessed with maintaining proper posture that she doesn't notice how one shoulder is sagging. The teacher was very surprised and realized that she was hearing about this for the first time, since no one had ever made such a remark. The guy suggested trying again and showed her how to do it. The lady asked what would happen if she did this, and he said the violin would make strange sounds, then suggested trying it again. When the teacher pulled the bow a few times, she realized that everything was different, and the sound became deeper, and the melody was now much softer. The woman asks in surprise how this is even possible, and the young man explains that most people have their own special pose, but it is difficult to find. The main character explains that if he doesn't change his posture, the teacher thought about how she's been playing the violin all her life, but she's hearing about this for the first time and doesn't understand how he can know everything down to such small details. Hyun tells the woman that she mentioned that a letter of recommendation would be needed to participate in the competition and asks if that is true. Pak reports that he said it correctly, and the boy asks if it's scary if it comes from a foreigner. At this time, the maestro is conducting a rehearsal, and he turns to the bald man and offers to play the other part again. The bald man says that something good happened to the maestro because he is somehow soft today. The concertmaster thought that the conductor's baton, which cut the air in rhythm with the music, seemed so sharp and as if you could cut yourself with it. But the maestro behaved as if he were plush. The man suggests looking at the other musicians because they also can't believe it. The accompanist says he's waiting to connect with someone from Asia. He himself has no idea, But apparently, the maestro has found someone there who can inspire him. The manager apologizes for dropping in so suddenly during a break. The conductor insists he's fine and asks what his question is. Joseph reports that he received a letter from the conductor, who says that he has no one to send letters to. When the maestro looked at the letter, he said that it was good news, and he did not even expect that they could contact him. At this time, the young gentleman saw the suit and asked his grandfather with delight whether he had prepared it for him. The gentleman explains that this suit is his, and today is the wedding of very important people, and they must go. The grandfather explains that the son of the head of Sunsong Holding is getting married, and the boy was surprised when he heard this. The old man looked at him and asked if he was surprised. The young man explained that he had read about something similar in the newspapers, and that was why he was surprised. The protagonist thought that, judging by the time today's groom is the youngest of the heirs of the Kim Seung-jin Company, because of his riotous lifestyle in the business world, he is known rather from the bad side, and he recalls that he also met him in the prosecutor's office. The guy remembered that he almost never left them, and always brought them nothing but problems, and therefore, he thinks that the poor bride is guilty of nothing. At this time, the man looked at his watch and thought that his father should have already left. But suddenly, he saw his dad with the boy, and asked in surprise if he was taking him with him. The uncle turns to the boy and informs him that there will be many adults at the event today, and therefore suggests that he behave properly. The main character claims that he will do everything perfectly, and at that time, he thought about what interests him, and whether he is even aware of how his younger brother behaves. The guy thinks that this is simply ridiculous, because he is worried that he cannot keep a straight face, and therefore he thinks that he should worry about himself, not about him. The grandfather and the boy got into the car and told the driver to leave, but at that time, the uncle only looked after them in surprise, because he did not have time to get into the car. The chairman says that no one even invited him, and upon hearing this, the boy smiled and thought that his grandfather was simply irresistible. The main character thought that his letter should have arrived by now, and that the maestro had probably already read it. A man approaches a woman and says they haven't seen each other in a while. She thanks him for coming all this way. Adam, the editor-in-chief of the Gramophone magazine, says that all this is not worth it for the sake of the Queen of Strings, and then says that congratulations on the release of the 30th album. The man confidently claims that she will win the Gramophone Award again. Hirose asks if he thinks he's being too biased. Adam objects and says that she should understand that their magazine is the most popular among music magazines. The journalist claims that this is not a case where the editor-in-chief's one-sided view decides everything. The lady says that she knows this, and Adam says that he heard that she left her position as a judge at that international competition, and then asks in surprise why, since she knows that everyone is waiting for her. Hirose explains that she doesn't think her assessment will be fair this time, because she was so taken with the performance of one of the musicians that if he appears on stage, she will no longer be able to concentrate on other performances. Hearing this, the man thought that if the Queen of Strings herself says so, then he knows every violinist currently active. He wondered if there was a newcomer to the competition among them whose melody could set her soul on fire. The lady turns to him and says that she heard that at the last auction, someone bought the Stradivarius. Adam says that, to be honest, he was hoping that she would also take part in it, since this Stradivarius has the same number as her instrument. Hirose smiled and insisted that this did not mean that she should buy it, since she already had a longtime friend with 4 strings. The journalist reports that he is against the Stradivarius being exhibited in any museum, and even more against it gathering dust in the safe of yet another rich man. Adam says that this time, as expected, it was quickly bought by someone influential from Asia, but the instrument only reveals its true value when it is played. The maestro reports that Paganini said that this violin has a soul, and that it may be an angel or even the devil himself. But only those who played it know about this, and therefore he suggests not to worry, because ultimately, this violin will definitely find a suitable owner, someone who can definitely handle it. Hearing this, the man became curious about who the real owner of the violin was, and where was the one who was able to charm her with his playing. At this time, the main character sitting in the hall thought that perhaps this was because they were at the wedding of the heir of one of the 10 largest chaebols. The boy understood that there were a lot of people who were present at the banquet, and the ceremony would take place in the cathedral, and they were going to pass off a marriage of convenience as true love. Yuha tells the guy to look at the bride and groom, and then says with delight that they are beautiful and look like a prince and princess. The girl quietly said that she too would get married someday, and Yun thought about the brutal and bloody divorce that awaited them in the future. And he knew that marriage wasn't all roses. The host says that they are presented with a festive concert for newlyweds. Hyun saw Baek Chung-hun. I thought that the maestro himself was iron and blood there, Sitting at the festive table, a girl asks a boy if he wants to eat anymore. He objects and suggests she eat for herself. The guy looked at her father and thought that he wished the man would stop staring. But he understands that he would like to know why his daughter behaves this way. The gentleman asks Winston how things are going in Tianjin. He explains that negotiations are currently underway with local politicians and thinks they need a little more time. The man wonders how about expanding into India first. The chairman slammed his palm on the table, and Winston apologized and said that the negotiations would be completed as soon as possible. Watching this, the protagonist thought that Chairman Song was very categorical, and of course his insight was simply something. China attracted his attention, not only because of its cheap labor, but also because in the future, this country will become dominant in the global semiconductor market. Hyun understands that he still has to live to see this happen, and believes that maybe he really is a prophet. The boy watched the adults and told the girl that her grandfather was very popular because everyone wanted to say hello to him. Yuka reports that it's very boring. The boy thought that one might think it was his wedding today and not that guy's. The protagonist reflects on this, which is not surprising, given that many people here were once Chaehyun Holding scholarship holders. The gentleman turns to Chairman Song and says that he is Sungjin, the heir to the Song Company, and then thanks him for coming to their wedding. The chairman of the Dream congratulates them and wishes them a happy life, and also wishes them an addition to the family. At this time, Yuka noticed that the groom had something on his neck and asked the guy if he saw the same thing. The main character looked and realized that the veins on his neck were sticking out so much, and he knew that this was a side effect of Viagra. The guy says he doesn't know and thinks it's strange, but the girl suggests that maybe he's sick. Hyun suggested that the little girl go to another hall, and when they arrived, they saw a pianist. The main character turns to him and says that he never thought that they would meet here. Chung-hoon says in surprise that they haven't seen each other for a long time and asks how the young master is doing. The boy looked at him and couldn't understand why he was so awkward, because he knew that this awkward young man would later become a charismatic performer. Hyun knows it's pretty hard to see right now and asks how he knew he would be here. Chung-hoon explains that he simply noticed him as he was walking up on stage. The boy insists that he and his grandfather were thrilled because he performed brilliantly. The musician asked the boy if he noticed he'd made a mistake. The young man replied that he had, and the girl asks in surprise if there was a mistake in his performance, because she knew that his playing was absolutely precise and amazing. The guy thought that this was a truly festive performance by a musician of the new generation, and even if they don't know anything about pianos, you can feel how wonderful it was at his level. But in this excellent game, his fingers seem to go numb, and the guy asks if he likes this place. The musician says in surprise that he really sees and knows everything, but the boy objects and claims that not to that extent. The main character knows that Paek Chung-hoon will be called a maestro of iron and blood, but one fact will remain forgotten. He is a relative of the chaebol Song. Hyung recalls that he is not familiar with all the details of their family affairs, and this may be due to his difficult character and cold nature. But it seems like the pack itself, Chung-hoon, wouldn't be happy if everyone knew about his origins. The young man thought that he had completely forgotten about it. The protagonist tells the musician that there is no need to restrain the music with his own hands. After all, when people listen to his speech, they will forget about all the ordinary and useless things. The boy understands that the current Paek Chung-hoon is not the maestro he knew, but he is confident that this young man will definitely spread his wings and fly high. The teacher asks him in surprise if he received a letter of recommendation. The guy says he already has recommendations and is also surprised that the response came so quickly. Hyun suggests the girl try changing her hand position slightly. Yuha delightedly says that the sound is truly completely different now. And the lady is interested in who wrote him the recommendation and asks if it is really the foreigner he was talking about. And the boy replies that he is the one, and therefore tells her not to worry. The teacher says that any letter won't work and believes that a recommendation from someone authoritative is needed. The main character thought about whether he should tell her and who wrote it, and if he names them, he wonders if it will sound too shocking. The assistant turns to the young gentleman and informs him that the chairman wishes to speak to him for a few words. The gentleman invites the guy to come in quickly and asks for forgiveness for pushing him out of class. Hyun assures him it's nothing serious and asks what's going on. The chairman offers him a seat first and says he heard he'll be participating in the competition. The guy says that's true, and the teacher suggested he try it. The gentleman asks if he likes music that much, and the boy at this time thought that he was doing everything in order to dodge the army of Paduk with him, and the guy agrees. The man says that if he can defeat him, he will give him something, and therefore suggests that they begin. At this time, the maestro conducting a rehearsal tells his colleagues that they are working well today. The conductor turns to Dmitri and says that he is thinking of having a bite to eat somewhere, and then asks if he would like to go with him. A few minutes later, the men were already having lunch at the restaurant. The gentleman explained that Queen Eliza had decided to postpone the competition until the fall. The maestro believes that everything is really turning out to please this guy, and he will still have time to prepare. Dmitri looked at him and thought that after the trip to Korea, he was in some kind of good mood because he had changed so much. Dmitri reflects on the fact that there are people in the orchestra who think that the maestro has become even more terrible. A man asks his assistant how he thinks their world would change if Paganini came back to life. The man says he doesn't even know it's hard to imagine. Spencer believes that the whole world would be watching his magical melody with bated breath and asks if this is true. Mr. Song asks his friend when he managed to teach Hyun to play paduk. The grandfather looked at him in surprise and wondered what he was even talking about, since he didn't even know that his grandson could play this game. The chairman claims that he not only knows how to play, but that he is brilliant at it. The man recalls that when he played with the boy, he said that he played better than he even thought. The gentleman reflects on the fact that if he really did not know how to play paduk, he would not have known from the very end that he had just completed the approach. The game was tense, and he only won because of a shift in the balance of power. And he knows that Hyun himself succumbed to him. When the grandfather heard this, he was surprised, and then said that in fact, something had recently happened to him too. The man asks if he has heard about the project to develop new materials. The gentleman says that he knew that there was something fishy there, but he couldn't figure it out specifically, and his grandson didn't have a clue. The chairman says that you should have personally seen how he refers to each individual law and considers this boy to be simply amazing. Suddenly, a friend grabs his hand and calls him a matchmaker. Grandpa tells him to control himself. The chairman asks if he's forgotten the terms of the bet. The man assures him he certainly hasn't, and asks if he thinks he's that old. The gentleman turns to the secretary and asks to bring this thing, and also to call the guys here. Chairman's son tells Grandpa that he knew that he would be grumbled at, but he bought it anyway. At this time, the main character reflects on the fact that he was still interested in what gift the chairman of the dream was talking about. The boy thinks that this was such an unexpected offer that at first he didn't even think about what he wanted to offer him, and therefore he can't figure it out. The girl finished playing the violin and asked the guy how he liked it. He said she was incredibly talented and did very well. At this time, Hyun thought that maybe he shouldn't have given in to him, but he understands that what's done can't be undone. The secretary opens the door and tells the boys that their grandfather wants to see them both. Hearing this, the girl says with displeasure that the grandfather always calls them exactly when they are playing. When the children entered the office, the gentleman invited them to come in and sit down. The main character does not understand why his heart is beating so wildly when he sees this case. The chairman turns to the secretary and offers to open this case and says that it seems to him that she even had her own name. When the case opened, the boy saw a body made of flame-red wood, or a black neck like a deep crack, and the main character realized that this was a Stradivarius violin called Fantasy. Hyun Surprise says that this is a fantasy, and the gentleman says that this was exactly her name, but he still couldn't remember the name. The main character does not understand if this is true, and thinks that it might all be a dream. After all, the masterpiece among the instruments that burned in a fire in a past life is now right before his eyes. Then the bigwig from China who bought the violin made the absurd statement that the fantasy had ignited itself, although perhaps this was true, and it seems that the violin bewitched him as soon as he saw it in person, and the boy thought that he wanted to play it. Yuka says with delight that this violin is incredibly beautiful and asks his grandfather where he got it from. The chairman explains that he actually bought it as a gift for Hyun, and the boy was surprised when he heard this. The main character does not understand whether the gift that the chairman of the dream spoke about was really a Stradivarius fantasy. The gentleman says that unfortunately, Hyun lost the bet, and therefore it's a pity, but it seems he won't be able to give it to him. The chairman of the dream reports that he will lend him this thing for the duration of the competition, because it is an important matter after all. Having heard this, the guy thought that he knew that he had lost on purpose, and did not understand what kind of mockery this was. The gift that the chairman of the dream was betting on was none other than a Stradivarius violin. Hyun doesn't understand how he could have made such a mistake, because now he thinks that he should have won at all costs. The gentleman says that be that as it may, and asks if it is not a shame to take her only for a while. Hyun asks in surprise what he's getting at. The gentleman says that if he wants, he'll just let him use it during the competition, and then give it to him for good. Chairman's son asks him what he thinks of this idea. The protagonist looks at the violin and can't understand how anyone could give away such a masterpiece for nothing. The boy knows that this is a fantasy, and just one look at it makes his heart ready to jump out of his chest. The guy thinks that he should quickly and urgently say that he needs this violin, because then he will be able to get it. Hyun closes the case and says he can't accept such a gift. Hearing this, Grandpa asks in surprise why. The boy explains that this is too valuable a gift, but it would be too rude of him to decline his offer, and so he suggests simply using it during the competition. The chairman said he agreed, and then suggested they proceed. However, I realized he was stunned after this conversation. The man asks his friend if he saw how the guy's eyes lit up, but he still refused the offer. The gentleman believes that for such a young man, it is simply incredible endurance, because he was able to refuse such a masterpiece. Mr. Yu reports that he is also surprised, since this is the first time he has seen him so fired up about something. The chairman again grabs the man by the hand and calls him matchmaker, and then asks if he thinks that his grandson and his granddaughter. Grandfather suggests that he stop talking about it, and then tells him that their wishes will always be more important. Sharon, the editor-in-chief of Gramophone magazine, tells a man that the weather today is simply disgusting. The journalist reports that she heard that Adam returned from a business trip to Japan. The lady claims that because of him, she had to put these arrogant newcomers in their place single-handedly. And then screaming, he announces that he thinks they became critics from God, simply because they got a job at their magazine. The man says that as editor-in-chief, she doesn't necessarily have to worry about such things, and then asks if she thinks that's why everyone avoids her. Sharon agrees with him, and then says that it doesn't matter who moves, and asks if she thinks differently with him. The lady recalls that recently a strange rumor was circulating, because they say that Spencer from Volante wrote a letter of recommendation to someone. Hearing this, Adam was very surprised, and said that Spencer was that strict and proud London maestro, and then asked if this was true. The journalist believes that this cannot be, since he never had a single student. Sharon reports that this is not all, and the Queen of Strings, whom he admires so much, recommended the same person. Hearing this, the man remembered a conversation with Hirose, who said that she had already fallen in love with the performance of one of the musicians. Adam wonders who he is, the man who received recommendations from Spencer and Mrs. Hirose at the same time. The magazine's editor-in-chief asks if he seriously wants to know this, and then says that it is obvious that these are just rumors. The woman picks up the phone and says that this is a planning command from Queen Eliza, and she is listening. A few minutes in, she says they're up to their ears in work, and after the call, she tells them to keep their hands busy because that's the name Hyung. Yuka looked at the guy and asked if everything was okay with him, because she saw that he was very worried. The maid asks the boy if he's lost his appetite. He assures her that he eats slowly to stretch out the food, which is delicious. Then he thanks her for the meal and leaves. The main character reflects on how the image of that violin has been stuck in his head for the last few days, and he thinks that he should have just taken it while it was available. The guy understands that his opponent, the chairman, is a man who will not give such gifts for nothing. Hyun remembered that in his past life, he was so close to getting to know the habits of businessmen that he felt sick, and therefore knew that he was clearly up to something. The guy immediately thought of his granddaughter Yuka, but he still thinks that this is not it, and this simply cannot be, because they are still children. The boy understands that there must be another reason, because it is impossible for him not to have ulterior motives. The old man asks his Hyung what he's thinking about so hard. He explains that he's trying to guess what goodies his grandfather will buy today. The waiter shows them the table they reserved, and the main character realized that someone was already sitting there. The boy saw his parents and was very happy, because he didn't even imagine that he would meet them today. Hyun asks his parents how they ended up here. His mother explains that their grandfather invited them here, and they really missed him. The father greeted the grandfather and bowed to him. The gentleman said he was fine and asked if he was tired from the journey. The man objected and said he felt fine, and the grandfather tells his son-in-law not to be so nervous. And the boy thinks about how his grandfather allowed his father to consider him his father-in-law, and remembers how in his past life he never even considered such a thing. Dad asks why his son is so happy, and in response the little one just smiles. Grandfather tells father that if he needs his help in the future, he should not be shy, and ask because he will do everything in his power. Chairman Yu looked at his son-in-law and asked if by any chance he was interested in the chemical industry. Hearing this, the father, surprised, asks if he is talking about the chemical industry. Grandfather thinks that given his education, he thinks that this job would suit him, and then asks what he says. Hyun thought that of course his father was interested, because the material that the company was currently developing could save him from many problems in the near future. He understands that the chemical industry will become an industry producing high-value added goods in the future, and Donju Chemical will become the goose that lays the golden eggs. The boy looked at his father and thought that he wanted him to agree because he would do everything to help him. The son-in-law thanks for the offer and then says that it was so sudden and he doesn't even know what to answer. Grandpa thinks everything is fine and therefore suggests thinking about how much is needed. Then he announces that he has one more idea. The guy tells Yoo-hoo that he's staying in Seoul. When the girl heard this, she immediately ran up to him, hugged him, and then told him he was the best. The teacher says it turned out really well and asks if he submitted the recording to the competition. He says he sent a video from the banquet. The lady thought that they had probably already started selecting candidates because she knew that thousands wanted to participate in this competition. Hyun understands that there will be a lot of competitors since this is an international competition. Peck says that among those same sounds, only 200 people will read the web and watch their videos. The teacher says that because he has no experience participating in other competitions, it may be difficult for him to get into the selection based on letters of recommendation alone. Meanwhile, the jury announces that Hirose and Spencer have nominated the same guy for the competition. Then they ask how old the youngest contestant is. The secretary says that it was a violinist from Russia, and his name was Andre, and at that time, he was about 20 years old. The woman asks where this boy from China is from, and the man objects and explains that he is from Korea, and thinks that this is nonsense, because he hasn't even participated in anything. The head of the jury says that he thinks that if they don't take this competition into account, they will be able to decide for sure if they listen to his performance. Hyun asks what happens next. The teacher says that if they like his recording, and after viewing 200 videos, they will select only 60 candidates who will have the chance to perform at the competition in Brussels. Or from these 60 a few more, and after that, even more. From one selection, only 12 people will remain out of 24. Yuka asks if the selection process ends after this. The lady explains that, of course not. But that's where the fun begins. Not far from Brussels, there is a secluded mansion called Chapelle, where 12 selected violinists will live and train for 8 days. The lady informs him that this will be shown on television. Upon hearing this, the young gentleman doesn't understand who Chapelle is and why this sounds like a training camp, thinking he'll have to film for the show as well. The main character is thinking that it sounds a bit too boring, and the woman says that if he wins the competition, he will be allowed to take a violin made by the hands of a great master. The master's violin is a patronage effect, plus influence on the audience during the performance. The boy thought that what worried him most was the exemption from military service. Yuka says that she will now bring the violin, and at this time, the teacher asks in surprise what she is going to bring. The guy screams and tells her not to do it, but she acts like she doesn't hear him, and then gives him an instrument and suggests that he play. At this time, the boy does not understand whether she really had such a violin with such an antique case. The woman was washing dishes in the kitchen and wondered who had come in at such a late hour. Then she approached the gate. The postman announces that a letter has arrived from abroad, and the woman, surprised, asks who could have sent it. When Hyun saw the case, he realized that it was that very violin, and it felt like his heart was about to jump out of his chest. But as soon as her body touches his shoulder, the sensation subsides unusually quickly, and now the fantasy radiates warmth, as if she had been waiting for him all this time. When the boy started playing, the teacher didn't understand what kind of music it was, and she wondered whether it was Mozart or Beethoven. The lady realized it was a melody she'd never heard before, but within her, she continued to hear the signatures of various renowned musicians. The teacher became interested in where he got this melody from. The protagonist has not decided what exactly he is going to perform. He simply allows his hands to move so as not to be completely absorbed by this instrument. By focusing only for a moment, you can drown in the melody of the violin, and the guy understands that he must hold on because he cannot give in to weakness. Hyun thought that if he had opened the case for the first time only at the competition, he would have been so impressed that he would not have been able to play. The lady asks what tune he just played. The boy replies that he has no idea and that he was just thinking about a tune. Only she knows. The guy understands that this melody is so beautiful that it gives him goosebumps and is something that any violinist dreams of, or the devil's work. Mr. Song asks if Hyung is going to Brussels. Grandpa says something like that. The man smiles and says it's impressive because his grandson is truly something else. The man thought that he had never imagined that he would pass the preliminary selection so easily. And then he asked the old man if he thought that musicians were a bit like orchids. The gentleman asks in surprise how the friend explains that they too overcome many obstacles and difficulties to flourish, and that they are similar in this. Hyung is really like that. The old man insists that he sparkles in all directions like a brocade carper. Grandfather believes that, although he is a child, he is completely reasonable and even plays the violin with such passion. Chairman Song thought about how, when Hyun refused the Stradivarius, he realized that money couldn't buy it, and then he takes his friend by the hand and calls him his dear matchmaker. Grandfather asks what kind of person he is. A chill already runs down his spine and asks why he keeps doing this. A friend asks why he's so reluctant. The gentleman objects and explains that he's not at all against Yuka, but he believes their feelings should be mutual. The old man thought that he no longer wanted to interfere with such things with his greed. Suddenly, a girl ran up to her and greeted them. Mr. Dream asks why he doesn't greet his grandson's bride. Grandpa insists he's an old man. A mother asks her son if he forgot his passport and ticket. The boy claims he checked several times. The woman says he might not like the food and that she hasn't prepared enough for him for the trip. Her son tells her not to worry because he thinks he has enough. Mom says that if his ticket hadn't been moved back 2 weeks, she would have prepared better. Hearing this, the main character does not understand why they are waiting for him before the others, not to mention that they are giving extra points for it. The grandfather asks the boy if he's looking for someone, and he says he doesn't see Yuka. The old man smiles and asks if he hoped she'd come see him off. The guy felt a little shy and thought that she was constantly beating somewhere nearby, and that's why he got attached. His mother worriedly asks if he can really handle it alone. The boy assures him that of course he can, especially since he'll be met at the airport. The woman says that then her soul is at peace, and the guy says that he is already leaving. The parents saw their son off, and the grandfather asked why they weren't leaving. Suddenly, they saw a girl, and she ran so fast that she fell. The grandfather looked at his grandson and the girl and thought they were acting out a scene from a movie. The woman asks the gentleman if he was waiting in the car, and then says that Kang Hyun's plane has already landed, so he should be here soon. The man offers to look at his impudent face. At this time, the little girl was very sad. Mr. Son says that they met with the chairman of the U. The old man says that it's good that they are here, but at least he could have hinted that Yuka would also come, because he doesn't know that then she wouldn't be so sad. The man explains that until yesterday, she was stubborn, saying she didn't want to go anywhere, but he still knew that by the morning she would change her mind. Mr. Song greets Hyunju and says that they haven't seen each other for a long time, and then asks if her husband is with her. The lady greeted the gentleman and asked how he was doing, and at that time, her husband was surprised because he saw a very important gentleman. The grandfather invites his granddaughter to come up to them and say hello to Hyun's parents. The little girl greets them warmly and calls them mother and father, and then says that she is pleased to meet them and that her name is Sun Yuka. At this time, a young gentleman arrived at Brussels International Airport. The boy thought that in Belgium, there really was no one who did not know about the Queen Eliza contest because the workers had greeted him very warmly. Hyun thought about how this competition was so famous that it was even shown on local television. But suddenly, he wondered where his host was. The guy saw a woman holding his name in her hands, and then walked up to her, greeted her, and asked if she was an employee of the competition. The lady says, "Welcome to Brussels," then shakes his hand and tells him her name is Eva, and she's from Queen Eliza's planning team. Suddenly, the young man saw the man and did not understand why he was staring at him so angrily. Eva asks if he knows other violinists well. Hearing this, the guy doesn't understand why the question is so sudden, since he knows there are a couple of world-famous musicians. However, the guy thought that, apart from those whose fans he was in his past life, he didn't really know anyone. The man says that this young man seems too insolent, and the protagonist thinks that he is seriously neglecting him just because he is a child. The guy understands that he can't show weakness at times like these. The lady suggests they get in the car first and then continue. Hyun turns to the man and asks what he is talking about and calls him old man. The man asks if he decided to go, despite the fact that he doesn't like that guy, and then remembers that he is the only one who complained about why that boy irritates him. The gentleman reportedly wanted to personally verify how impudent he was. He thought it would be better if the Hyung were handed over to him. The man says that he asked Eva, so she should call soon. At this time, the guy was sitting in the car and did not understand who he was to be running around with them everywhere. The lady asks the guy if he wants to look at the Mazar, because he thinks he can look at the concert hall before the competition starts. Hyun thought that the place of residence was not far from here, so it would be good to take a look in advance, and then he agreed. When the boy entered inside, he was very surprised, because it was such a majestic antique hall. The young man thought that he would perform there, and the man came up to him and asked why he was staring, because if a violinist comes here, he must certainly play, and then asked if that was so. Hyun claims it's up to the person holding the bow to decide. The gentleman says it's just an excuse, and he doesn't have the courage. The guy asks if he takes a leak every time he goes to the toilet, and then claims that the old man is talking nonsense. Hearing this, the man screams and asks what this damn obnoxious fellow is allowing himself to do. Meanwhile, the main character doesn't understand why this person continues to follow him, but he understands that this is not the driver, and therefore also an employee of the competition. Hyun doesn't understand why they hire such rude employees, and if this continues, he will file a complaint. At this time, the men watched them from behind the door and thought that Alexei looked somehow angry. However, they believe that he would not quarrel with a child, whoever he was. The gentleman says that it looks like they are really arguing, and then asks if they shouldn't intervene. The man suggests that the gentleman make way, because now he will figure out what is going on. The main character doesn't understand what that sound is, and when he looks around, he sees a man lying on the floor, and he wonders who all these people are. Alexei says that they all came to look at him and calls him an arrogant boy. The man asks the boy if he knows who they are. Hearing this, the boy doesn't understand. He was supposed to teach all the competition staff members a lesson. The gentleman says that he saw the recording and then asks how he managed to play Beethoven's violin sonata. Hearing this, the boy doesn't understand that the recording isn't intended exclusively for viewing by judges and believes that they also have leaks. Ava tells the main character that she was told that the violinist Mozart, who entered the stage, simply had to pick up the bow. Suddenly, a guy with a violin in his hands walked past them. The gentleman says that he is an impudent boy. The guy thought Spencer had written a letter of recommendation to a violinist. The assistant explained that the guy's name was Kang Hyun, and he was Asian. Hearing this, the gentleman thought that the pride of the London Volante, the conductor who was moving the whole of Great Britain, had recommended someone else, and not him. The young gentleman reflects on the fact that, of course, there are talented newcomers who attract attention, but he does not understand why everyone is so restless. Suddenly, the young gentleman saw a guy with an Asian appearance and realized that it was him. The guys are surprised and ask if this boy is also participating in the competition because they think he is too young and assume that maybe he came here by mistake. At this time, the main character thought that this was not a bit better than being an animal in a zoo. Hyun knows that there are initially 24 members, and they are still very young, but there is no doubt that many of them will end up on the final list. The boy thought that the atmosphere was so familiar, as if he were back in the Justice and Law Training Center. The guy thought about how he was seeing kids at that age again, and a smile was creeping onto his face, although he was also nervous. Hyun reflects on the fact that this is a moral battle that combines complacency and restraint, and he hasn't felt that in a long time. The gentleman announces that they are starting the first hearing, and the order of performances is random, and each participant must play the composition assigned to him. The man announces that the first to perform will be number 37 Kang Hyun. As the main character walked down the corridor, he remembered how a man once told him that if he wanted to become a Jihan Holding Scholarship recipient, there was one condition. He shouldn't even think about continuing to live as a righteous lawyer. The meaning was clear. He had to give up his dreams and principles of justice and stand up for the company instead of the law and justice. The guy thought that he didn't hesitate for a second, because he was ready for this from the very beginning. When the boy came out on stage, he saw men, and among them was the man he had recently met. And at that time, he thought that he had really screwed up because he had shown off in front of such masters. Hyun looked at them and thought that now he needed to think about something else, because if they were so professional that they deserved to be judges, then they would be able to put aside their grievances and focus on the performance. The man suggests number 37 to begin, and the boy, without thinking twice, pulled the bow. A jury member says he imitated Brahms very well. The protagonist reflects that he didn't even know they would be commenting on the performance. Hyun recalls that he heard that they often don't even listen to the end, and thinks that it's good that at least he hasn't heard any heavy sighs yet. The man asks how long he has been playing the violin, and the guy says that it takes a little over a month to properly learn. When Alexei heard this, he thought this boy was so talented that the Queen and Spencer couldn't hide their admiration. And besides, the remark was spot on. The man thought that he had been obsessed with music for as long as he could remember, and all this time, something had been limiting him. Bitterness within harmony, and whether it is possible to perform such music without experience. Alexei realizes that there is something important that he is missing, and then he turns to the guy and calls him an impudent guy and asks why he plays music. At this point, Mr. Song asks why the old man is so busy, and if it's because of his grandson. Grandpa replies that it seems Hyun chose music. The old man asks if he didn't want this himself. The man replies that of course he won't stand in the way of his desire, but the future of Donju is chemical. The chairman interrupts him and asks if Yuka could take over management, and then his grandson could study music. Grandpa, surprised, says he's making this up, and his friend asks if he still thinks only a man can run a company. Mr. Sun claims his offspring suffered so much because of his beliefs, and he still suffers from this nonsense, and so he proposes to end it here. Grandpa asks how Yuha is. The gentleman explains that she couldn't see her Hyung off, and he also thinks his father gave her a strange look, and is very worried about it since she likes her Hyung so much. Mr. Yu thinks he's reducing all conversations to one thing. The man explains that he's simply relaying Yuka's words, and if she found out that he needed to give her the violin tomorrow, she would probably start to act up and say she wanted to go herself. At this time, the girl heard their conversation and asked in surprise if she should give the violin to her hyungs. The young gentleman thought that he had passed the first stage of selection, and he did not understand why he was not at all happy about it. The young man doesn't understand why he's involved in music and believes he's never thought about it at all. But he does think that avoiding military service is of course also an important thing. Hyun understands that all these guys who came to the competition put a lot of effort into playing the violin, and he understands that in comparison to them, his heart also starts dancing. The boy thinks that the violin is leading him every time he plays, but he doesn't know why his past life suddenly came back to him right before the performance. Suddenly, a guy emerged from the bushes, and when he saw the Asian, he thought he was the quiet guy. And then he explained that he was passing by. Hyun entered the hallway, and then asked how long he was going to follow him. The stranger asked if he was going to the rehearsal room. Meanwhile, the young man was thinking about how Queen Eliza had prepared separate rehearsal rooms for each of the competition's participants. They are connected to the hotel, so that competitors can train without losing time. Hyun says that he is going to practice, and the guy asks if he can watch him rehearse. The boy understands that in the second round, he has a free choice of composition, but since nothing can be changed now, he then agrees to come with him. At this time, the blonde thought about how some performers forbid people to watch them train, but he understands that this guy is sensitive. The young man thought that he wanted to make sure that this child was truly worthy of Spencer's recommendation. For several minutes, the bow plays a slow, quiet melody, as if it were barely creeping along, and the heart fluttering in the chest dissolves in this music, as if it is forced to pass through impenetrable and utter darkness. The fair-haired boy doesn't understand how he could convey such a melody, because he believes that this requires the wisdom and experience of an adult. The young gentleman understands that this guy handles her as if it were a piece of cake, and he is fascinated by her performance, but he does not know why he is so nervous that he even holds his breath. The guy thought that even in front of the public at the Royal House of Music, he was calm as a bull and did not understand what kind of feeling he had. Ava suddenly enters the room, apologizes for interrupting, and asks William if he's listening to his hyungs playing. The main character asks what her business is, and the woman says that he has a visitor. The boy asks in surprise if they have come to film him, and then says that previously filming only began closer to the last rounds. The lady explains that this was the case until the last competition, but the regulations were changed, and therefore suggests not to worry, as he may only be asked to give an interview. Hyun asks if they will only film him. The lady smiled and he understood everything. The unknown Korean boy receives letters of recommendation from the Queen of Strings herself and a maestro from the London Philharmonic. He easily passes the first stage of the selection process. The interest is understandable. Hyun agrees, but in exchange asks not to disturb his rehearsals any longer. When the young gentleman was ready to give an interview, a girl suddenly ran up to him and hugged him. He was very happy that it was Yuka, and he also saw his mother. The boy asks in surprise what brought them here and why Yuka is behaving like this. At this time, the director thought that this shooting would begin with an ordinary but happy picture of the performer's life. The girl calls the boy Hyunushka and offers to try it. Meanwhile, he's thinking about how she can barely hold chopsticks herself, and she's about to feed him too. Hyun thanks him for the offer, but he thinks he can handle it himself. His mother asks why he's embarrassed. Mom thought it was a bit awkward, and then quietly asked her son if they were going to film them like that. The guy thought that if he was uncomfortable spending the whole day in front of the camera, he could hardly imagine how much more awkward his mother would feel. But fortunately, Yuka didn't care at all. Hyun apologizes and then asks how long they will be filming. The woman apologizes if this causes them inconvenience, and then says that their family looks harmonious this way. The lady says that if no one minds, they would like to interview his mother and younger sister, but they would not like to bother anyone, so they can refuse. Hearing this, the boy thought she thought Yuka was his younger sister. And his mother, surprised, asked what the journalist had said. The young man explains that they want to interview both of them, and said that if they are against it, they can refuse. Yuka says with delight that she wants it, and her mother says that she doesn't mind either. The guy says that they agree, and the journalist thanks him, because she didn't even think that they would agree. The main character thinks that he is now interested, because they will now think that it is normal for Korean culture, if the sister takes such good care of her older brother. Mom tells him that Grandpa Son sent him a violin. Hearing this, the boy thinks the neighbor's grandfather is actually the chairman of a large company, and he thinks Mom knows his face and is talking about him. Mom explains that when they brought the violin from Yuka, there were other people with them. The guards said the chairman asked them to deliver it personally, and then asked if it was that expensive. The son explains that his grandfather only offered to lend him the money for the duration of the competition, so he doesn't even know. And at that time, I thought that it was terribly expensive, because for that kind of money, you could buy real estate in the center of Seoul. The boy thinks that his mother will be shocked, and therefore it is better not to tell her. William recalled a conversation with a Korean boy, and how he'd asked him how long he'd been playing the violin, but the answer was about a month. At this time, an assistant comes into the room and says that the second round is coming soon, and then asks if he thinks he is exhausting himself. The blonde man says he doesn't have much time, and the assistant asks in surprise what's going on, and suggests he start by wiping the red liquid off his face. The assistant thought that this was the first time he saw William like this, with his proper attitude. He recalls that even at the Royal Conservatory, where the best are selected, he looked down on others from the heights of his talent. But now he doesn't understand why he's so tense. William says that soon the end will come for him, because he will never become the second Salieri. Hyun reflects on how he didn't think he would be given a separate waiting room, and believes it's because there are so few contestants left. The guy understands that it became so quiet after Mom and Yuka left, but they were a little disappointed that they couldn't watch the performance, because the second stage of the selection was closed to spectators. The protagonist understands that they're about to eliminate someone, and only 12 people will remain. The topic is open-ended, and there are no genre restrictions. The journalist looked at the old violin case and thought that it looked unusual, and then told the director to pick up the violin. Hyun thought that he hadn't picked up the instrument yet, but his heart was already beating like crazy, as if the violin itself was asking him to get it out as soon as possible. The guy says that he has been waiting for this, and today he will help her demonstrate her true value, and therefore offers to make this performance worthy together. The man tells number 37 to get ready, while the journalist watches him. Hyun opened the case and saw that it was empty. A man asks a lady if she remembers the fantasy. Hirose believes that many people are interested in Stradivarius lately, and the gentleman says that the Queen Eliza competition is in full swing, and the woman says that it's time for Hyung. Hearing this, Jung-hoon asks in surprise if she's talking about her Hyung. She insists he asked if she remembers the violin, and then asks how she could possibly forget about it. The fantasy is cold, like the thickening darkness, and the euphoria that she now has is hot like the scorching sun. And these are the only violins with the same number left from Antonio Stradivari. Chung-hoon reports that he heard it was a sensation when they were both put up for auction several decades ago. Hirose says that she was there but couldn't get the euphoria that day. Hearing this, the man asks in surprise what she is talking about, and then says that everyone thinks that she was the one who took her. The madame explains that, at that time, she was just a beginner, and both instruments were taken by another person, an elderly gentleman, and one day he came up to her and gave her the violin, with the words that she would create countless melodies with this instrument. Hirose says that she still doesn't know who it was, and doesn't remember his face, but she will never forget their promise. The man, surprised, asks why he gave her euphoria. The lady explains that he said the Stradivarius violins would find their owners themselves, and for now he'll just take care of them. Chung-hoon wonders what will happen if the violin does not find its owner. She claims that then the violin will turn into a pile of ash. A judge invites the next contestant, Hyun, comes out on stage holding a violin. Antonio thought that he didn't even hope to see this violin, and therefore believes that the Queen Eliza competition was really worth waiting for. When the man saw this violin, he got up from his chair because he was very surprised, and the other gentleman does not understand how this boy can have an imagination. The woman who was watching the main character thought that, as expected, the violin was an unusual instrument, and she has such an amazing feeling. The gentleman suggests starting because he doesn't want to waste time. Fantasy and euphoria will find their masters. And if someone incapable of mastering them touches the strings, they will lose the ability to see the world and hear the melody. However, I wonder what will happen if the true owner of the Stradivarius violin is never found. The only answer is that it will turn to dust. Did she really find her master and turn into flame instead of ashes? The jury understands that playing myths in such a setting is so pathetic that it sends shivers down one's spine. Great despair, from which there was no escape, surrounded the nymph Arethusa, and only God's blessing saved her. Alexei wondered if this impudent boy was trying to convey this blessing. The goddess of mercy stops Arethusa in a source of water, and the ending of the myth is tragic. And then, it was unclear what kind of melody it was, and why it seemed to contain love and blessing, and yet it seemed to refuse to end in pure unhappiness. Gentlemen, I don't know if anyone has ever interpreted myths like that. The jury understood that it was an excellent performance, and Alexei praised him so unexpectedly, and then said that he still had not found the answer to his question, and that was just his impression. William performed after Hyun. When he finished playing, the gentleman said he was like fireworks in a field and had a wonderful sense of melody. Then he asked why he was in such a hurry, as if he was locking himself in a place he couldn't escape. The man suggests remembering that excessive emotion can kill a melody. The young gentleman says he'll take that into consideration. At this time, the main character thought that Alexei had caught him by the hand, but he had thought about this a lot lately, but still had not found an answer. The young man believes that the reason he makes music is the reason for creating music. Hyun saw a girl with long blonde hair in the hallway and realized that she was very worried, and then asked if everything was okay with her. The girl insists she's fine, she's just a little nervous. He suggests she just breathe deeply, but she hears someone calling her and runs. The boy thought that he would like to return as soon as possible, because for some reason he was tired. The gentleman tells the girl that this is a bad performance, but he believes that she has talent, but her body is so tense, and the melody is simply doomed to become the same. The blonde thought that she had made a mistake, and just wanted it all to end as soon as possible. At this time, the main character looked at the people who were leaving with sad faces, and he began to wonder if he could make music with such a carefree attitude. Suddenly, the guy saw Yuka's gaze and thought that it was so obvious, and then assured that everything would be fine. The girl assures that he is doing a wonderful job, and therefore, of course, he will do a great job this time too. Hyun thought that there was no need to rush, because he would find his reason. Mr. Jury says that all the musicians are at a high level this year, but William was a bit of a disappointment. After all his haste crossed out all the advantages, and the same with Anna. And she definitely has talent, but her nerves got in the way. The woman suggests first deciding who is the best participant. The gentleman claims there's nothing to discuss here, since that impudent kid was the best he understands. He lacks motivation, and his skills are far ahead of the rest. Alexei believes that he plays as if Paganini came back from the dead. The man says that this is good, and if he manages to achieve success at such an early age and not burn out too quickly. The gentleman says that he has no reason to study music, and if he has no inner core, it becomes difficult to hold the bow, and if he can no longer contain his emotions, his skills will deteriorate. The jury thinks that there is no need to worry about this at all, and asks whether they even saw his face when he held the Stradivarius. The man believes that if he didn't love the violin, his expression wouldn't be like that, and then claims that it looked like the face of the Queen of Strings. The gentleman says there will be no further discussion, and everyone unanimously agrees that in the second round number, 37, Kang Hyun will take first place, and he thinks no one has any objections. A unanimous decision had just been made at the Queen Eliza competition. Alexei believes that if this young man can find a reason to be a violinist, then a golden age will come in the world of classical music. The jury announces that based on the results of the second round of competition, Hyun will move on, and they congratulate him, and later additional information about the third round will be announced. The girl surprised asks what they said. The boy says he passed by, and then they hugged him. At this time, a journalist was watching them, and thought that he didn't even blink an eye, and thought that this was simply an amazing child. Ava says that during the discussion, the one who took first place was also chosen. William insists it's obvious it's Kang Hyun. His assistant surprised asks how he knows. The guy claims that it's because no one else is capable of it. William thanks for reporting the results, and then says that he needs to train and can leave. The man, surprised, claims that all he did in the evenings was exercise, and believes that if he exhausts himself, his body will suffer. The gentleman says that there is not much time left until the third round, and as his manager, he asks him to take a break at least today. And the guy screams and claims that then he won't be able to step on his heels in his entire life. And the main character, surprised, asks if she is talking about the first place that was accepted unanimously, and then asks if this happens often. Ava says that, as far as she knows, this is the first time this has happened in the history of the competition. Hearing this, the guy thought that, to some extent, he had expected this, but he was not prepared for first place and a unanimous decision. The gentleman says that he is glad to see their 12 contestants, and then announces that his name is Mark Ampere, and he will tell them about living in the Chapelle mansion. The man says that they will spend the next 8 days there, and the mansion is located in Waterloo. During this period, all contacts with the outside world will be prohibited, and they will enter into agreements with them regarding this matter. The gentleman says that a meeting with the conductor of the Belgian National Orchestra will be organized for them. Hearing this, Jung thought that he had heard that the King of Belgium would also be present there, and understood that this was not some simple event. Mark says that the training camp starts in 2 days, and therefore asks that all necessary preparations be completed before that time. The gentleman says that he would also like to convey to them his sincere congratulations for these 8 days in the chapel. They will give them the best impressions. At this time, the main character thought that he was looking forward to performing with the orchestra, because until now, he had only been able to play with piano accompaniment. Suddenly, the boy saw that all the other participants looked at him very strangely and had angry looks. Hyun understands them because he is nameless and very young, and is placed on the same level with them. Everyone except William, who personally saw him play, is naturally skeptical. The young man looked at William and didn't understand if everything was okay with him because he was still raging and throwing tantrums. Suddenly, a stranger approaches the guy and then says that he is very pleased to meet him and says that his name is Zhang Yan and he is from China. When the main character heard his name, he remembered that in his past life, this violinist was called the Star of China. He became famous not only for his skill, but also for his volunteer musical activities, and he was also nicknamed the Sage. The boy understands that the Chapelle competition and the Queen Eliza competition seemed so far away compared to being next to the people who became great maestros in his past life. Hyun realizes that only now does he realize where he's ended up. This is a fateful round between a rising Chinese star and a Korean prodigy, and the lineup is quite strong. Yan reports that he heard a lot from his teacher, and this time there are many new talented people at the competition. The protagonist, surprised, asked if he was talking about Maestro Dan Luna. The guy replied that he was on good terms with his teacher. Yan recalls that his teacher said that he was insightful when it came to the violin, and that said a lot about him as a person. The Chinese guy says that he actually wanted to meet before the tours, but he was afraid it would be rude. Hyun thought he was being very polite. Yan said that he would be happy to perform on stage with them after the competition anyway, and then asked if he could ask for such a thing. The guy says that of course he can and he would also like to perform with him, but then he says that he doesn't have such experience yet. Yuha turns to him and calls him Hyunushka. Yan asks if this is his fiancé. The journalist concludes the interview and thanks him for his work. She turns to the boy and says he's a good boy. Hyun thanks her and says she tried her best too. The ladies ask him what his mood is, and he asks in what sense. The woman explains that after so many trials, he finally got into the chapel, and then asks how he's feeling. The guy says that he doesn't even know, and it's hard to say yet because he's not in Chapelle yet. And then he says that he's looking forward to a new experience. When the main character saw the hotel, he was very surprised by its luxury. The gentleman offers the boy to take the empty seat, and then he turns to the other people and says that they have all gathered, and therefore suggests that they begin. Adam says that today is their first day here, and therefore he will tell them how the chapel's work is organized and introduce them to the local rules of residence. The gentleman suggests getting to know each other better first, and starting from the left side, and then asks the guy to introduce himself. The guy says he's pleased to meet you, and his name is Zhang Yan, and he's from China. He played Brahms during the second round, so he hopes they'll get along. The man said his name was Eric, and that he was from the north. The boys looked at him and thought he was very tall. The young man says he is Daniel Bruhl and plays at the Berlin University of Music. Joseph says he is from the Royal Academy of Music. At this point, the protagonist thought that this brought back memories of his first day at the Institute of Forensic Research and Training. And then, as now, everyone was so busy promoting themselves. The young man can't remember what he said then. The guy turns to Hyun and says it's his turn now. The main character stands up and says that his name is Kang Hyun, and he is from South Korea, and he is 14 years old, and in the second round, he played a piece by Szymanowski. Eric looked at the boy and asked if he was really 14. Then he claimed he was so short he couldn't have been more than 10. Adam says that if he has any questions, he can ask them in person after the presentation. And at this time, the guy thought that he should not only let them wait, but in a couple of years, he would grow even more. The girl with silver hair says that her name is Anna, and she is from Russia, and studies at the Tchaikovsky Conservatory. Hyun realized that this was the same violinist who had a fear of performing. And despite this, she still decided to participate. And therefore, she understands that she has good skills. The guy says his name is William, and he's from the UK. The guys look at him in surprise, as he said very little about himself. Hyun doesn't understand why he's acting this way. Adam says that he's finished introducing them to the chapel, and now he needs to explain the rules. The man says that as they already know, entry to Chapelle is completely prohibited for outsiders, and this means that all internal affairs are carried out crudely by their efforts. The gentleman explains that in addition to cleaning, he'll also have to take turns preparing breakfast and dinner. Hearing this, the boy thought it was some kind of boot camp. Adam reports that cameras are installed throughout Chapelle to film their daily lives and music sessions. Everything will be edited and then broadcast, so he asks to participate in the life of the mansion, and then he says that this is all the information for today. Adam hopes that they can develop their musical talents and realize their dreams in the chapel. The guy says that they have finally been given some free time and asks if they want to chat about anything. William says he doesn't have time and will go to rehearse. Anna says she'll go too, and all the guys leave after her. Jan, surprised, says that everyone has left and only they remain. The protagonist says that ultimately they are all competitors here, and therefore believes it won't be easy to just become friends. Hyun recalls it was the same at the institute. After the first day, all that friendly atmosphere vanished like a mirage. Everyone began to plot against each other in order to ultimately achieve victory. He doesn't understand how it's possible to avoid such fierce competition when they are all competing to achieve the same goal. A man asks the maestro what's wrong with him. He says that the boy is now wearing a chapel. The gentleman doesn't understand whether he's talking about that guy. She asks if Dmitri was also wearing a hat. Dmitri claims that he was there too, and then reminds that the maestro was there too, and even won the main prize. Spencer asks his assistant if he knows about the legend associated with this place. The man asks if he's talking about the god of music. Dmitri reports that this is a legend that all violinists have known about since ancient times. In the chapel, and he has endless melodies. With the blazing dawn, he will approach the chosen one. But the maestro objects and says he will not go. Spencer says that he will call him with his soothing melody. And then, if it is him, at this time, the main character remembers the faces of the guys when they were on the first floor, and thinks that this is not much different from those he saw in the past. Hyung thinks that the problem is not in the atmosphere itself, but on the contrary, the problem is that he has become so accustomed to it. The boy doesn't understand why this is so, because he thinks that he made a different choice and stayed with his family, and thought that he had found a new dream. But this situation was nothing more than a repeat of his past life, and at that moment, he realized he couldn't let it go. The main character opened the case and took the violin, and when he looked at it, he thought that, in this condition, it would not be able to sound properly. Hyun thought that he could go and get some fresh air, because he thinks that if he breathes some fresh air, maybe he will feel better. Walking down the corridor, the boy heard the sounds of a violin, and he became curious about who was practicing at such a time, especially with the door open. The guy understands that he can't hear well, but his skills are simply excellent, although the melody seemed to have become numb, and he began to wonder whose room this was. Hyun decided to take a look, and at that time, he thought that he was ashamed to eavesdrop, but still it was interesting too, and he was too curious. The guy saw that it was William, and remembered that he had bandages on his fingers. The boy wondered how long he had been rehearsing, but suddenly, he felt as if he had been found out. Hyun finally opened the door a little, and looked into the room, and when he saw the guy, he realized that he looked exhausted. The main character thought that it was as if he was looking at himself from the past, and he didn't think that it was so difficult. The boy understands that he just wanted to live better, but is that path really worth leaving his family? The guy was very tired then, but he thought it was stupid, and now was not the time to relax. Hyun knew he needed to quickly repeat something, but he couldn't comprehend it at the time, and mindlessly tried to simply move forward. The protagonist understands that a path that is so exhausting cannot make anyone happy. The young man believes that until he himself admits that this path is wrong, he will not be able to listen to anyone else. Walking through the garden, the boy thought that even at night, it was so beautiful here, and also very quiet. The main character thinks that he is very sorry that they are here only to compete with each other. The boy would just like to meet here and discuss everything related to music, but he doesn't understand how to get everyone to agree to this. Hyun suddenly doesn't understand why he should even bother with this, since he knows that he doesn't gain anything from it. The guy remembers that before he didn't care at all what was going on with other people, and he began to wonder if he had changed. Suddenly, the boy was surprised, and wondered if he had imagined it, whether there had been a deer there. At this time, William was rehearsing and became very irritated, and then threw down his bow. The guy doesn't understand why the hell his performance won't leave his head. William thinks he's trying his best, but doesn't know why he can't even get a little closer to his skill. The guy thought that, of course, no one could surpass this boy, and he would try all his life, and still not catch up with him. William recalls that he was destined to become a musician who would represent Great Britain, and his father said that he was proud of him. The next morning, the main character was surprised, because there was a lot of delicious food. Jan says that he is on food duty today, and therefore prepared what they usually eat for breakfast in his homeland. Hyun excitedly asks if he made it all himself, and then claims that it looks delicious, and thanks him. The protagonist thought about how he had been trying to live on bacon toast for so long, and that for the first time in a long time, he would eat Asian cuisine. The boy asks why no one is here today. The guy explains that they all ate. It's the third day of living together, and the atmosphere is still tense due to the relationships between the contestants. The main character doesn't understand why it's so hard to say thank you for the food, because he believes that food should bring pleasure, and that this is the law. Hyun says it's very tasty, and then thanks him. He asks if he intentionally put less spices. Yan, surprised, asks how he figured this out. The boy explains that as far as he remembers, the dishes he cooked today should have a richer flavor. Hyun says that his dishes didn't seem spicy at all, and therefore believes that he deliberately added less spices because such cuisine may be unusual for people from other countries. Yan says that he is glad that he noticed, but he just thought that maybe they could all talk over food. The guy from China says that all he managed to get was a greeting, and none of them really wanted to talk. The protagonist understands that it is difficult for rivals to simply have a sincere conversation with each other. Hyun says that he will help, and this is for him because he prepared food for them all. Yan says the guy tried hard, but the young man insists it was nothing special. The guy from China says that he is surprised because he washed so many things. Yan reports that he saw William today, and he doesn't like the way he looked today. After all, he quickly ate and left, as if he was worried about something. And at the same time, he looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept for several days. Hyung says it's worrying and then asks if they can come in and check on him. William is there, but they didn't hear anything, and not even the sounds of the violin were audible, although he rehearsed from morning until night. Yan says that he is not in the room, but the door is open, and then they decided to go inside. The boys saw William lying unconscious on the floor. Hyun approached him and asked if he was okay, as he was all wet. Yan screams and says that he will call someone and then leaves to call a doctor. The guy asks if he can hear him and suggests he wake up. He doesn't understand why he had to bring himself to this point. The main character asks why he abused his body like that. But suddenly, I heard William quietly say that he didn't want to lose and would work even harder. When the doctor examined the guy, he said that he was apparently overtired, and if he gets a good rest, everything will be fine. The guys who gathered in the corridor say that thank God everything is fine with him, because they were very worried about him. And at this time, the main character thought that no matter how worried he was, there was no need to make himself faint. Hyun became curious about how long he had been studying and guessed that it had probably been a very long time. William, lying on his bed, says that he needs to go to rehearsal quickly because if he doesn't go, he won't be able to win the competition. The protagonist thought that he couldn't believe that he said this after William fainted from exhaustion. The guy wondered if he was too complacent since everyone else was so desperate for music. Hyun reflects on the fact that he is here only because of his talent. The boy understands that if he continues to make music with this attitude, he begins to wonder if everything will be okay. Yan offers the guy some tea. Hyun thanks him, and the guy says that everything is very confusing in this place because everyone is exhausted. The main character thought that it was impossible to say that he didn't understand why everyone was taking this so seriously. However, he believes that others have reasons to work so hard, but he doesn't. Hyun thinks that maybe it sounds rude, and then asks the guy why he makes music. Yan asks if he will be satisfied if he answers that it is simply what he is good at. The boy, surprised, asks what that even means. The guy explains that he's always enjoyed helping those in need. Yan believes that material assistance alone cannot provide for everyone, and that it is incredibly difficult to heal a broken heart. The protagonist thought about this and made him understand that his game could comfort other people. After all, what he is good at is helping other people, and he considers this to be such luck. Hyun reflects on how he played the violin and took part in a competition, but never thought about how the person listening to him felt. Yan says that this is only his reason, and therefore suggests that he take his time, because he believes that otherwise it will only be more difficult to touch other people's hearts. The guy claims that if there is a path he wants to follow, then let him go. Hearing this, the main character thought that the nickname Sage was clearly not given to him for nothing. Hyun thought that this was the path he wanted to follow, and he just realized it. When William woke up, he saw his Hyung near the bed and was very surprised. The main character asks if he is awake and inquires about his health. William screams and asks why he is here, and if he feels sorry for him, then states that he will not tolerate this anymore. The guy screams and asks if he even knows who caused all this to happen. William says that the music he plays haunts him every day. He claims that his game haunts him like a curse, and then asks what he should do in this hell. William announces that he is challenging him. Yoon says that he accepts the challenge. When the main character entered the room, he realized that it seemed like a rumor had started about this, since everyone had already gathered. Hyun looked at William and wondered if he had been rehearsing all night again. The guy tells the main character that they will play 30 seconds of the same piece, and the audience will determine the winner and loser. The boy agrees and asks if he has anything in mind. He says Paganini's Caprice 1-24. Hearing this, Yan thought that this would allow them to demonstrate their skills. The guy suggests flipping a coin to see who comes first, and then says that he comes heads and Hyun comes tails. Hyun says that it came up tails and then he will start, and then asks why he wants to compete with him so much. The guy says that he can of course offer something to some extent, but he wants to hear it from him. William says that when he heard him play that time, he became so angry that it was as if there was a huge wall in front of him that he couldn't overcome. The young gentleman explains that he tried to distract himself by playing other music, but the melody returns to him again and again, tormenting him. William asserts that as long as he is a Hyung, he will forever live in the shadows.